Chapter 400. Duque was also dumbfounded. He had never expected that Kale would be able to create such an exaggerated and insane wall of fire with his full strength. No, this was no longer a wall of fire. This wall of fire that could move forward should be called Wave of Fire. Ordinary earth mages couldn't cast Wave of Fire. Sky mages could probably create a wave of fire that was 20 meters wide in a short period of time. Duque calculated his limit and estimated that he wouldn't be able to withstand a width of 200 meters. That's right, a Morningstar mage could indeed act as a small nuclear reactor and produce magic power on their own. But just as its name suggested, it was only at the level of the light of the stars. Considering that Kai-Z was only a radiant moon, according to the estimation given by the system notification, it would be impressive for Kale to create a wave of fire that was 500 meters wide at most. Now that it was 2 kilometers wide, even if it was a short-term spell, it wasn't hard to imagine that the amount of magic and mental strength needed to control the spell was astronomical. Without a large pile of top-notch epic magic equipment, it was impossible to survive. As expected of a nouveau riche. No, it should be said as expected of an imperial family. The wealth of the Sunstrider Wang family, which had been passed down for nearly 7,000 years, was indeed unimaginable to outsiders. Any low-grade item that they didn't even bother with was enough to cause a civil war among the Dalijan pharaoh outside. Second-generation Wang, let's be good friends. Of course, Duque, who called himself an honest and reliable gentleman, would never have any ideas about Kale. Well, it was another matter when he thought about how he had cleared Kai-Z's dungeon countless times before he transmigrated. The trolls below were miserable. No one would have thought that the runestone array could be used in this way. The runestone itself could raise a huge tornado of wind and thunder anywhere in the Long Song forest, killing all the creatures inside. Duque did the exact opposite. When he was unable to gather the power of wind and lightning, he directly drew more power from the earth vein. A dried-up ley line could easily form a huge underground hole. There wasn't a problem at first. But not long ago, this place had been tormented by all kinds of huge beastmen war machines, and Duque had drained the veins of the earth, causing the earth to lose its support. Then, under the system's calculations, it became a perfect trap. Now, all Kale had to do was force these trolls into a trap. Raging flames swept across the entire battlefield plains. The flames caused the surrounding temperature to rise, and the temperature of the air was greatly increased. Putting aside the sparks that were constantly flying in the turbulent flow, the air was so hot that even breathing it in would cause severe burns. Once the flame landed on any flammable object, it would immediately burst into flames. Under Kale, control, the fire burned everything in its path. A distant memory surfaced in the hearts of every troll. They suddenly realized that they were just like their ancestors, mercilessly driven away by the magic elves. They left the land they stood on, left the homes they lived in, and walked step by step towards death and destruction. The raging flames reminded them of the burned capital of the Amani Empire. The trolls screamed in terror. This scream was like that of their ancestors, filled with panic and despair. No, it can't be like this. Zhu Jin frantically urged the power of his wind, trying to use it to fight against Kale, flames. At this moment, without Kale, reminder, more elven powerhouses took action. The astromancer Caponia merged her flames into Kale, flames. Kale, chief astromancer Solarian did the same thing. It wasn't just them. More members of the Silver Moon Council joined the battle, encouraging this huge wave of fire to sweep toward the trolls. Boom, boom, boom. The raging flames roasted everything. This wall of raging flames reminded the trolls of the distant Dark Age, which was passed down by word of mouth from their ancestors. At that time, a forest fire could often destroy a troll clan. Now, this fear was pressing into the depths of the hearts of every troll on the battlefield. They kept retreating because they were afraid of the flames and falling off the cliff. Nearly 50,000 trolls huddled together along the long and deep ravine. All the trolls' hearts constricted from fear, and the screams of their companions in the face of death deepened the chaos of the team. Some trolls began to be pushed down into the deep ravine. This unlucky troll waved his limbs in horror. Blood gushed out from all over his body, and his vision instantly turned from a blazing light to a pitch-black darkness. He unconsciously opened his mouth, letting the wind rush into his lungs as he fell. After falling for an unknown number of seconds, he lost consciousness under the impact of an indescribably violent force. Ah! Shrill cries came from the deep darkness, echoing continuously, making it impossible for them to judge how deep this ravine was. Panic spread further. The wave of fire was getting closer and closer. Some trolls recklessly rushed into the wave of fire, trying to rush through it to vent their final anger on the elves. But after a few steps, their bodies were charred black and turned into charcoal, kneeling in the flames. More trolls were pushed down into the ravine in panic and chaos. On the city wall, countless highborn elves who stayed behind pressed their chests excitedly, and their fair faces flushed with excitement. They stared at this scene, afraid to miss any detail. This was the end of the hateful trolls. This was the end of the trolls who had slaughtered their compatriots, their loved ones, and deserved to die 1,000 times. And at this moment, their great prince, Kale, that Sunstrider, had avenged them. They shouted crazily, unable to control themselves. Many highborn elves had already taken over the wave of fire, and Kale, that's finally put down his biggest burden. He summoned his phoenix mount, Ao, and stood in the air above the battlefield in a hovering posture. Subconsciously, he looked back at Duque, who was standing on the city wall. Duque was very calm. His pitch-black and deep eyes were like the endless starry sky, with an indifference that could decide the life and death of millions of living beings. Duque calmly watched the entire battlefield, but it gave Kale, that's the illusion that the entire Kuel Salis was under Duque's control. Surprisingly, Kale, that's didn't feel any fear or unease. On the contrary, Kale, that's actually had a feeling that the people might have a better life if the country was handed over to Duque. He didn't dare to tell anyone about this feeling, because this feeling was definitely not what a crown prince who was going to control the entire country in the future should have. Kale, that smiled and waved at Duque, but all the elves thought that the prince was waving at them. Immediately, a tsunami of cheers sounded. Chapter 401. Zhu Jin's eyes were bloodshot. He was so angry and so regretful. Why had he been able to defeat the high elves so smoothly before? Why had his 50,000 trolls been beaten like dogs after the orcs' main force left? Zhu Jin didn't know what Duque curse was. He only knew that he had done something that would make the trolls of Lordaeron unable to recover for more than a decade. Ancestor Amani, I should have trusted Orgrim. Zhu Jin roared as he fought with all his might. More and more powerful high elves besieged him. Unfortunately, he realized this too late. Prince Kale, that's Zhu Jin remembered this name purely because he was prepared to make the high elf prince's head part of his collection. Now, the owner of those eyes was looking down at him from above. The huge bird-shaped elemental creature under the prince seemed to cover half the sky. The crimson flames under its wings kept flapping, stirring up golden-red clouds of fire. The golden things that floated down from the sky like stars were actually the phoenix's spontaneously burning tail feathers. It was these feather-shaped golden lights that poured down, turning Haraz, who had transformed into a lynx, into a dead cat. His cat-shaped corpse turned into charcoal and lay in a sea of fire. The earth was burning, and so were the trolls' corpses, making creaking sounds. That was the sound of the flames burning the fat in the body. The Amani trolls were finished. The Mossfleck trolls were finished. Almost all the forest troll clans in Lordaeron had suffered heavy losses. Go! All of you go! Zhu Jin roared, ordering his elite subordinates to leave as soon as possible. Warlock Lord Malakas shouted, Chief, what about you? I can't go. If you don't go, you'll all die. Zhu Jin suddenly roared and transformed. First up was Xiong-Ing. He summoned a dozen or so giant tornadoes that were dozens of meters tall and forcefully withstood the flames of the two astromancers. He forced his way through the waves of fire and charged toward the elves' main formation. These weren't ordinary tornadoes. There was a strange, turbulent flow of energy in the wind. Energy turbulence. This strange power was similar to the mage's magic counter. However, magic counter could at most disrupt the stability of arcane energy and stop a mage from casting spells, but energy disturbance was completely different. The two astromancers were still able to cast powerful spells, but every time they cast a spell, they would suffer from the backlash of the turbulent energy. To their surprise, they discovered that Zhu Jin's power could penetrate most of their external defensive spells and hit the magic shields that were closest to their bodies. The two female arcane masters were taken aback. "Sasha," Duque ordered softly. Windrunners OL-3 immediately flew forward to intercept Zhu Jin. Although the eagle could summon strong winds, this form was a form that was completely against spellcasters. Sasha's high affinity with the wind allowed her graceful figure to easily move through the seemingly irregular tornadoes, dealing considerable damage to the eagle-shaped ancestral metal that was flying towards her at high speed. "Humph!" Zhu Jin spat. He transformed from a male eagle to a dragon eagle. Don't assume that both of them were eagles. They were actually two completely different life forms. The dragon eagle Zhu Jin no longer used tornadoes. Instead, he summoned huge pillars of flames and bombarded towards Sasha. Sasha was in a sorry state. Dealing with powerful spells was not her forte. However, at this moment, Prince Kale, that's made his move. Like a god of fire descending from the sky, Kale, that's landed on the empty space between Zhu Jin and the elven army on his phoenix. His mount merely flapped its wings and made all the flames within a radius of several hundred meters obey its command. They obediently and humbly lay on the ground. Zhu Jin's pupils suddenly contracted. From the twitching muscles at the corner of his eyes, one could tell how menacing his expression was under the mask. "Let me show you my new style." Fangs and claws. Zhu Jin transformed again. This time, he was a mountain cat. Zhu Jin actually attempted to circle around Kale, and continue killing towards the elven army. Everyone knew that the mountain cat form was definitely a high-speed form. If Zhu Jin was allowed to break through the defense and kill his way into the High Elves formation, there would definitely be a lot of casualties. For a moment, Kale, didn't have any good ideas about Zhu Jin. He had wanted to create a wall of flames with extremely high temperatures, but at this moment, Duque's magic message arrived. Fire men. Fire men, a special type of fire magic. Simply put, it was to condense the flames into human shapes and then let the running fire men run to the enemy and self-destruct. This wasn't a mainstream type of magic because it was too inefficient. For most mages, rather than waiting for the firemen to run over, it was more practical to just throw a fireball. Either way, these two types of magic needed to be guided, or they wouldn't be able to hit the target. Any high-level mage with common sense would instinctively reject Duque's suggestion. Kale, did as he was told. It was purely because he blindly worshipped and followed Duque. When dozens of firemen appeared behind Kale, a miracle happened. It seemed that the cat's unique dirty hands were acting up, or it seemed that after activating a certain skill, even Zhu Jin couldn't control his movements. The cat that Zhu Jin had transformed into, mountain cat, actually scratched those firemen. Bang bang bang. A series of dozens of huge explosions blew Zhu Jin up, and the huge mountain cat flew out. What's going on? No one could understand. Anyway, Prince Kale, had the upper hand, and everyone just cheered. Huge waves of cheers came one after another. Zhu Jin finally turned into a giant bear, attempting to resist the prince's flames and charge towards the elven army. This was obviously futile. The prince was never afraid of a head-on confrontation. He was afraid that you would slip away and disappear. 12 huge fireballs surrounded Kale, at the 12 o'clock position. With a light turn of his arm, 12 consecutive fireballs blasted towards Zhu Jin. Boom, 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 Zhu Jin resisted with all his might. Unfortunately, he didn't last long under the crazy bombardment of the next Elven King. 30 seconds later, the outcome of this massive battle was decided. Zhu Jin let out a wail as he was blasted away by Kale, like a high-flying ball. His huge bear-shaped body dissolved in midair, and finally turned into a human form as he fell. The impact of his fall was so great that he even smashed an arcane guard in an instant. However, the spikes in front of the arcane guard didn't make him feel any better, causing Zhu Jin to turn into a bloody man at the same time as he destroyed it. Dozens of elven soldiers went up and quickly tied up Zhu Jin. Chapter 402. The sound of Zhu Jin hitting the arcane guards was so loud that the entire ground seemed to let out a cry of pain at that moment. However, this was the last sound of battle on the battlefield. Apart from a few troll powerhouses who had been strengthened by the storm altar and used the power of wind to fly across the huge crack in the ground, 99% of the trolls were left behind. In the huge crack, the groans of the trolls could still be heard. It was conceivable that there wouldn't be too many trolls that survived, nor too few. The incomparably strong vitality of the trolls meant that as long as their heads and hearts weren't destroyed, they would be able to heal themselves perfectly. This wasn't important. The trolls in the crack had nowhere to escape. After they climbed out, what awaited them was death. Duque floated down from the top of the city wall with slow fall, landed accurately in front of Kale, and extended his hand to the elven prince. Congratulations, Your Highness Kale, This is a perfect counterattack. Looks like I can save my people a few hundred kilometers, Duque said loudly, his voice so loud that hundreds of people around him could hear him clearly. If the elves had suffered hundreds of casualties in exchange for the destruction of 50,000 trolls before the war with the Horde, the High Elves would definitely have shown Duque what it meant to be high. That kind of arrogant attitude of superiority couldn't be suppressed at all. Now, anyone with a bit of brains knew that this was purely Duque hanging the last fig leaf for the glory of the High Elves. A day ago, the High Elves who had been beaten like dogs were hiding in their main city. Even their last magical defense array had been broken by the Horde. They were like a young girl in thin clothes waiting helplessly in a corner to be ravaged by their enemies. Duque had made a dazzling appearance. The awe-inspiring might of repelling thousands of troops with one flag told the High Elves about the changes in the outside world, and also how terrifying Duque's power was. If not for Duque scaring away the main force of the Horde with the orcs as the core, the elves wouldn't have been able to take revenge on the trolls. If they hadn't resolved the siege as soon as possible, how could the scattered elven soldiers and civilians who were temporarily hiding in various parts of the Long Song Forest escape the ferocious extermination of the trolls? Moreover, after losing 70,000 troops, the elves could no longer straighten their backs. Kale, that was also very straightforward. He bowed to Duque on the spot. No. This is all thanks to your full support, Duque. We were able to cross the gates of hell and return to this world. Duque knew how to conduct himself, and Kale, knew how to conduct himself even better. Naturally, both the host and the guest were happy. Next up was cleaning up the battlefield and sweeping up the scattered giant demons. Aside from sending out a large number of demon spirits, Duque had nothing else to do. The cracks created by the runestone formation were almost 40 meters deep. This was a terrifying height for mortals. Most of the trolls who were forced to fall by the flames fell to their deaths. There were still quite a few giant demons who managed to avoid death by falling onto their companions. Of course, the elves would not let them go. Under Duze's instigation, they poured things like kerosene into the fire and burned those who were still alive. The healing power of the giant demons was useless in front of the flames. In fact, Duque really wanted the elves to attack from both sides and destroy Orgrim's elite troops in Kuel Salis. Unfortunately, while the elves complained about the heavy losses and the lack of troops to maintain order in the country, most of them were scared out of their wits. Didn't they see the Wildhammer dwarves coming out in full force? The elves refused to move. Duque still had to move. Even if it was not the right time to fight Orgrim, he could at least not let him act recklessly. Duque called for Kudrin Wildhammer and his Griffin Knights to chase in the direction of the Horde's retreat. Wait, I'm going too. Aurelia whistled. Under the stunned gazes of Duque and the dwarves, a group of rangers mounted the Griffin's back. Damn it! What if a battle breaks out? Kudrin protested loudly. Then I'll trouble you to drop us near the top of the tree. A Windwalker ranger who didn't fall to his death in the forest. Servanas shouted loudly. Aurelia hugged Duque's waist from behind. "Thank you for solving the giant demon crisis, but I don't know why, but I'm a little worried about what Orgrim will do." This was exactly what Duque was worried about. Running away like a dog with its tail between its legs was not the style of the beastmen. The griffin's speed was very fast. Flying at full speed at 70 to 80 kilometers per hour was not a problem. Of course, considering the griffin's endurance and food supply, flying at 60 kilometers per hour was the most ideal. If the griffin really flew at full speed, he would need to at least get a whole cow to replenish it. Where would he find 1,000 cows in Cuel Salis? That evening, when he saw the light in the distance reaching the horizon, Duque's worst prediction appeared: a fire in the Long Song forest. It was the middle of summer, the time when forest fires were most likely to happen. From afar, dozens of flames could be seen rising from the southern part of the Long Song forest. Obviously, this was not a natural fire at all. "Orgrim, you bastard!" Aurelia's pretty face was filled with anger and sorrow, and within a few breaths, her tears were all over her face. Not only her, but all the elves in Duque's vision also showed expressions of grief and despair. Duque was silent. As a transmigrator from a metropolis, he might never learn the rangers' love for nature. He also could not understand the grief they felt after the forest was burned, as if they had lost their loved ones. It was obvious that the horde had left after the fight with the giant demons last night. But after Orgrim had the horde march slightly out of the Long Song forest, he aimed at the direction of the wind and set fire. The more densely packed areas were obviously the work of the wolf riders, and it could be seen that the fires were more concentrated. If he wasn't wrong, it would be the work of Zuluhid's red dragon. The rolling flames swept across the front of the forest like a huge wave. The intense heat evaporated every trace of moisture in the air, and the forest swayed like a mirage under the light of the setting sun. There were many black spots swaying back and forth in the sky, spitting out long beams of light. There was no need to guess, those were the wyverns. Although the lush Long Song forest did not lack rain in the summer, and the trees had just been soaked by the rain, they were instantly burned to ashes by the blazing hot dragon breath. The thick black smoke, coupled with the darkness of the night, began to block the sun. The flames showed no signs of stopping, and followed the hot summer wind to engulf the trees further away. Although it was not enough to destroy them instantly, it was enough to set them ablaze. The fire spread endlessly in all directions, engulfing one tree after another. It was like a plague that was spreading at high speed. Chapter 403. Almost all the griffins let out sharp screeches when the heat wave from the fire hit them head-on. Even though they were the strongest in the sky, griffins were still instinctively afraid of fire. No, it should be said that this was the instinct of most creatures. Fly to the west. The leader of the Wildhammer dwarves, Kudrin, quickly made a hand signal. Only about half of the griffin knights reacted and flew sideways with Kudrin. A considerable number of griffins had to hover or fly back to find a way out. When Duque flew to the west where the air was slightly fresher, he pulled the reins of the griffins and let them hover gently, giving him and Aurelia enough time and space to watch the terrible disaster in front of them. It was different from when Duque burned down the elven forest. At that time, the elven forest was completely occupied by the enemy. And humans did not have as many thoughts as the elves. But now it was different. When Duque squinted his eyes to reduce the strong light entering his eyes, Aurelia unconsciously tightened her grip on Duque. It was a strength that was far above that of Duque's. The strength of her arm was so strong that it felt like it could squeeze Duque's internal organs out. "Quick, stop this fire!" She shouted as if she had gone crazy and shook Duque's body forcefully. "Duque, aren't you omnipotent? Hurry up and stop this damn fire." "I can't do anything." Duque really wanted to say that. He was not a druid, nor was he the Virgin Mary, nor was he a savior. He was just a mage who was more good at destruction than creation. But listening to the mournful trembling in Aurelia's voice, Duque only felt that his heart was also broken. The giant dragons were like playing bats, hovering low in the sky in front of them. Wherever they passed, there was a raging fire spreading. Perhaps these red dragons were unwilling to listen to the orcs' control at first, But as time passed, it was clear that some of the red dragons also accepted this identity. Under the orc's guidance, they released the tyranny in their hearts. In his field of vision, half of Kuel Salis was burning. The flames and smoke were like a cage of destruction, tightly enveloping the home of the high elves. Like the god of death, the flames spread from the foot of the mountain to the foot of the other mountain. It turned the places it touched into the fiercest red flames, and behind it, a remnant of darkness that was left after the flames had been completely burned. Duque was sure that even Silvery Moon City could see the fire. This was revenge. This was Orgrim's revenge. Just like how he burned the elven forest and left the horde behind. Now, Orgrim was using the same method to pay back what Duke had done to the horde. Duke's perfect strategy was now filled with pain and regret. At this moment, it was Aurelia who was begging him. Duque, I'm sorry. I don't want to force you, but I'm just a ranger. I can't deal with this fire. Aurelia leaned her head on Duque's shoulder, and Duque saw tears flowing down her cheeks from the corner of his eye. But I have to stop it, because the forest of Kuel Salis is my home. Duque could not refuse. I'll try my best. After saying this, Duque blew a small horn, the signal he had agreed with Kudrin. Kudrin raised his warhammer high and roared, "Little ones, put down our guests. We'll take care of those big lizards. Tell them who's the master of the sky." Oh, the griffin riders had their griffins slow down and fly low. Then, like dumplings being dropped into a pot, they had the agile rangers jump onto the treetops of the various trees. Finally, they formed into a formation and began to charge forward. Even though they knew that this would be accompanied by sacrifices, Duque directly jumped down, because he saw a river a few hundred meters away from the front of the fire. The river was about 5 meters wide, and the water was quite turbulent. The system genie appeared. "Host, I have to warn you that what you're doing is meaningless. The chance of you completely extinguishing this fire is 0.00001%. There are some things that don't have to be done for sure." Duke replied in a deep voice, "Sometimes, people will do things that have no real meaning just to make themselves feel better." "I'm sorry, host, I don't understand what you're saying." Duque did not continue to answer. He directly cast a spell. After a short acceleration, the 3 magic circuits in his body operated to the extreme. Sky mages could absorb elemental energy from the entire sky to strengthen their own magic. Morning stars could use this as a foundation to produce magic on a small scale. Because of the high temperature, the river had already begun to boil. The temperature of the fire was too high, and simply pouring water on it would instantly evaporate. What Duque did was not simply use water to extinguish the fire. Instead, he first extracted the fire elemental energy from the entire area. Absorb, absorb, and absorb again. Compress, compress, and compress again. Then, a huge fireball that had never been seen before emerged from Duque's palm like a mushroom cloud. The huge fireball was launched into the sky, and after rising more than 200 meters, it began to quickly dissipate because there was nothing left to burn. After extracting the fire elemental energy, the temperature of the air within a radius of several hundred meters in front of Duque plummeted, and some areas even had frost covering the ground, which was out of season. Good job. On the griffin, Aurelia unskillfully controlled Duque's griffin. But very soon, whether it was her sisters, or even the ranger she brought, they all began to fall silent. Duque was very powerful. By running at high speed and extracting the power of the fire elemental energy in a large area, and then replacing it with water elemental energy, he successfully contained a large area of forest from fire. However, his power alone was still too insignificant. So what if he prevented a 2 or 3 kilometer area from being burned? In just a short 10 minutes, the fire had already spread for hundreds of kilometers. If it wasn't for the Wildhammer Dwarves' griffin riders in the distance, the area of the fire would have been even larger and more terrifying. In the distance, the winner of the massive battle that erupted in midair was quickly determined. In terms of aerial combat, the griffin, which was only above average, was at an absolute disadvantage against the red dragon, which was the tyrant in the sky. The Wild Hammer dwarves used absolute numbers to make up for their lack of individual quality. According to what Duque said, the red dragons would run away on their own after dealing with the orc riders. It was obvious that the tribe had used some kind of threat or method to force the red dragons. Now, even if the riders behind the red dragons died, they would still choose to continue fighting until they received the order to retreat. Kudrin had no choice but to give the order to kill these red dragons as well. After being continuously hit by the storm warhammer, the red dragons finally could not hold on any longer. They howled and fell from mid-air, their bodies covered in wounds. The battle was over. Chapter 404. In fact, Orgrim, who was unwilling to accept defeat, did something else. He sent Zuluhid's dragon knights to attack the Sunwell. Unfortunately, they returned without success. The Battle of Quel'Thalas was over hastily. The invading trolls were completely annihilated. Apart from a few chief-level trolls who managed to escape with the help of the Storm Altar, not even a single egg was left. Even the troll chieftain, Zujin, was captured. Quel'Thalas was even worse off. A preliminary count of 80,000 soldiers and 200,000 civilians died. A third of the precious Longsong forest was burned down, and this was with the help of the heavens. Otherwise, it was unknown what would have happened. On the Alliance's side, the human army under Duque's command went on an armed march. With the support of the Yao Yao, they did not fight the horde at all. On the other hand, the Wild Hammer dwarves had a fierce battle with the Dragonmaw clan's Red Dragon Knights. Kudrin and his mount, Scare, had shocked everyone. The Wild Hammer King had killed 9 red dragons by himself. The sentries that Duque had prepared in the north were not put to use either. When they retreated from Quel'Thalas, the orcs split up. This also originated from the Sunwell. We can't even fight our way in. Zuluhid complained to Orgrim. It seemed like his anger was far greater than his guilt at his own incompetence. Even the dragons can't do it. Orgrim narrowed his eyes and listened attentively. Zuluhid emphasized loudly, shaking his head forcefully. I had my dragons spit out the last drop of saliva in their mouths to create dragon breath. Their flames have already enveloped the entire city. But so what? We are like fools roasting a rock. No matter how fierce the fire outside is, it will never reach the inside. I tried to let them charge in, but their claws were blocked by an invisible barrier. That's the Sunwell. Dan interrupted Zuluhid. It is the source of magic for the elves. It provides them with endless energy. Fortunately, you did not really charge in. Otherwise, the elves with the Sunwell could cast almost limitless spells and smash 1,000 fireballs into your face. Zuluhid was speechless. Orgrim, on the other hand, was deep in thought. Looks like I was right not to attack Silvery Moon. Even if the horde gathered 100,000 people, it wouldn't be enough to take down Silver Moon City. They would have to deal with the Alliance first before they could take down the stronghold. However, putting aside the elves for now did not mean that they would not have to deal with them in the future. The elves' large-scale magic formations gave Orgrim, who only knew how to fight in melee combat, a headache. Especially after knowing that there was a sun well further north of Silver Moon City. To conquer this world, be it the elves' Silver Moon City or the Well of the Sun, they would always be a hurdle that could not be avoided. Is there a way to destroy it or exhaust its energy? Or can we control it instead? Or use the Storm Altar to destroy their defenses? Orgrim asked Dan 3 questions in a row. A sly smile appeared on Dan's face. I don't know. I'm willing to try, but I don't know what the Sunwell will be like. The Storm Altar was made of runestones unique to the elves, and their energy originated from the Sunwell. I can try to connect to the source of its energy through them and transfer my magic power over to destroy it or control it. But Great Chief, this will take time, a lot of time. If he really succeeded, whether it was destruction or control, Orgrim didn't even need to think to know which one Dan would choose. From the bottom of his heart, Doomhammer did not want Dan to control this power. However, rather than leaving the power of the Sunwell to the elves who could cast mysterious magic beyond the beastman's imagination, it was better to give it to Dan. After all, Dan was a beastman. It was obvious that if they were to retreat, Dan would not have enough time to do all sorts of research. Seeing Orgrim's wavering goal, Dan decided to add fuel to the fire. He humbly lowered his head. "Great Chief, we cannot just leave like this. I actually have another plan for the storm altar. It will help the tribe to speed up the pace of conquering. I believe that it will be more beneficial for the tribe if my clan and I stay here for a while." "Ghoul," Dan used a low voice to tempt Orgrim. Orgrim furrowed his brows. He never trusted this short, ugly, and evil warlock. However, the pressure that the humans and high elves put on the tribe was too great. He had no choice but to use Ghoul again. Without the warlock, the tribe's warriors would only be like the trolls, tragically and helplessly falling under the powerful magic. He also had to admit that Ghoul, Dan's twin-headed ogres, played an important role in the Battle of Kuel Salis. It was these strengthened ogres and Galen's breakthrough that completely defeated the elves' giant arcane guards. According to the latest news, the humans had created something that could spit fire. There was nothing the valiant Grom Hellscream could do about it. The twin-headed ogre mages were different. They could use Ice Barrier while charging through the flames. It was not hard to imagine that without their help, the tribe would lose the ability to break through the Alliance's defense line. After thinking about it, Orgrim finally nodded. "Do what you must." Still worried, he added to Ghoul, "Dan, but don't delay for too long. We need to concentrate our forces to quickly take down Lordaeron." After the Beastmen entered the world of Azeroth through the Dark Portal, the humans had gotten through the initial period of discomfort and repeated failures. They had shown great resilience. There were all sorts of new tactics and weapons against the Beastmen. If they still used the same method that the Blackhand Great Chief used when they first arrived in this world, it would not take long for the Beastmen to go extinct. The humans were improving, and the Beastmen had to improve as well. When they reached the northern continent of the Eastern Kingdom, which was also the Lordaeron continent, Orgrim realized that the things he had to do had changed a lot. He began to pay more attention to information. If they had enough information, the tribe wouldn't have foolishly attacked one city after another. They would also not foolishly attack the farthest Elven Kingdom just to get the trolls as an ally. The 8 countries had only attacked Stormwind City. If they attacked the other cities one by one, how long would that take? Orgrim decided to change the tribe's plan and attack the Lordaeron Kingdom directly. "I won't delay for too long," Ghoul, Dan assured Orgrim. "Ghoul," Dan assured Orgrim and grinned. "If it really doesn't work, I'll make another storm altar to strengthen it and the army will come." Chapter 405. Orgrim took away almost all of the 2-headed ogres and Galen, but he did not see Ghoul, Dan and his Storm Predator clan or Gugur's Twilight Hammer clan. After wandering in the mountains for 3 days, Orgrim decided to change the route of the march. He bypassed the northern sentinels and returned to the north of the hinterlands from the original settlement of the Mossy Troll clan. He was prepared to attack Lordaeron through a route that no one in the Alliance could have imagined. Duque should have responded immediately. However, the rapid march over the past few days made Duque's troops quite tired. He could only order a 3-day rest. At this time, the High Elves held a banquet. A celebration banquet to celebrate the victory against the invaders. When he first heard the news, Duque felt like he was in shock. Celebration? What celebration? 300,000 High Elves died, and almost 1/3 of the High Elves perished. They only killed 50,000 trolls, and they still had the cheek to call themselves the victors of the war? Sorry. It is precisely because our losses were too heavy that Father and all the counselors agreed to hold a grand banquet to celebrate the victory and raise the morale of the people. Kale, that said to Duque with an apologetic expression, almost begging. Also, this will be the signing ceremony for Kuel Salis to officially join the Lordaeron Alliance. Since it was an official joining, Duque, as the highest representative of the Alliance, naturally had to attend. That feeling was like asking you to eat a fly. Do you want it fresh? Or do you want it original? They had already been beaten like a dog, yet they still wanted to pretend to be peaceful and show off their power. Wanting to save face and suffering was the best way to describe Quell, Dorii, High Elves, but the ones who suffered were the civilians. Beside him, Ilycia quietly tugged at the corner of Duque's clothes. Duque finally swallowed his anger and nodded in agreement. After waiting for Kale, that's to leave, Ilucia sighed and said, "Sorry, Duque, I know you are not used to it yet. To be honest, I grew up in a high noble family, and I am still not used to it. The decrease in the number of subjects and the burning of the territory will only mean a decrease in income. As long as the country is not destroyed, everything can be restarted. This is the way of thinking of the nobles." "I understand." Duque didn't hide his disgust for the Elven Council and the nobles. Sometimes, Duque even felt that the first, second, or third war at the Dark Portal might be a good thing. Without so many foreign enemies to clean up these terrible people, Azeroth would still be a rotten and hopeless world. Duque felt very conflicted. At night, it was not yet time for the celebration banquet. Carriages pulled by beautifully decorated chocobos had filled every space in the square of the Sunchaser Royal Court. Before seeing so many noble carriages, Duque would never have imagined that Kuel Salis had so many nobles. Each of the chocobos had been groomed until their feathers shone brightly, like proud phoenixes, raising their heads high and exuding a cold aura. One by one, elves dressed like the nobles of Stormwind stood in front of the carriages. Their clothes were luxurious and elegant, studded with gold and silver ornaments with magical effects, giving them the most elegant presence. If Ilucia hadn't whispered it, Duque wouldn't have known that these guys were just freaking coachmen. Coachman Earl Sai? Nobles of Stormwind. Do you want me to buy a box of tofu and let you drown yourselves? This extreme luxury caused Duque to be dumbstruck. The Sunstrider Royal Court, which was decorated in the palace style of the Sunstrider royal family, was ablaze with lights. The bright magic lights made the palace, which was filled with round towers and was mainly colored in white, red, and gold, look splendid. Crossing a huge red carpet that was more than 20 meters wide, Duque let Ilucia, who was attending as a female companion, hold his hand as they slowly walked up the steps. Stepping on the neat white jade stone tiles, Duque couldn't help but look up at the exquisite female elven statues on both sides of the stairs. These statues were either literary or martial, and with lifelike carving lines and passionate movements, they eulogized the greatness of the Sunchaser Royal Court. They arrived at the entrance of the hall. Kale, that had changed into a very festive robe and was greeting every guest. To Duque's surprise, Aurelia was also wearing a very family-style emerald green court dress, accompanying Kale, that's to greet the guests. Seeing Duque come over, Aurelia raised her skirt and gave a ladylike bow. Her elegant temperament and dignified demeanor made it impossible for Duque to associate her with the wild elven ranger. Aurelia put on a sweet smile and said in her pleasant voice, "Thank you for coming, Duque. If you had been absent, all of Kuel Salis would have been shamed." Duque, however, was sensitive to something. He looked at Aurelia's plump lips and bright appearance with lipstick, and unexpectedly found a trace of haze hidden in Aurelia's bright eyes. "Aurelia, what happened?" Duque said as he prepared to kiss her hand. Unexpectedly, Aurelia hugged him, passionately, and her low voice sounded in his ear, "It's nothing. It's just like you said, big people always have a helpless need to put on a show. It's just that it's my turn today." The show. Duque understood a little. If the trolls hadn't attacked, or if they had come but returned without any success, then Aurelia would have been the shame of the elves, and would have been held accountable and investigated. But the truth was that the trolls had come and turned Kuel Salis upside down. In order to whitewash peace and to restore the morale of the people, the elves needed a hero to divert the public's attention. Kale, that's lost and won, and at most, his merits offset his demerits. But Aurelia was different. She had a close relationship with the Alliance, and secondly, facts had proven that she was right. Helping Aurelia become a hero would allow her to answer to the people and the Alliance at the same time. As for what she wanted to do later, she just had to keep a low profile. First, he had to deal with the current situation. Duque sighed deeply. Because there were many guests, Duque went in after a brief exchange with Aurelia. In the huge hall with a diameter of more than 1,000 meters, countless tables were set up. All kinds of sumptuous food and flowers filled the entire venue. When Duque entered, a large number of nobles had already arrived. They were holding goblets of wine and shuttling back and forth, not letting go of any opportunity to socialize. The atmosphere was so warm that it was hard to imagine that this was a tragic country that had just experienced the flames of war and had lost 1/3 of its citizens. The banquet began enthusiastically, but Duque noticed that Aurelia, one of the protagonists of the banquet, was clearly smiling but seemed to be crying. Chapter 406. This was a grand celebration banquet, and there were at least 1,000 guests present. However, there were not many people around Duque. Due to the fact that the army had been forced to retreat with a single flag, the local nobles who did not know the truth did not know who was responsible for the elves' ridiculous reversal of victory. Moreover, Duque's background was too great. He was the deputy commander of the alliance, and all of his subordinates were kings. In theory, after Quel Salus joined, the wizards would be provided to Duque. In the end, those who dared to show their faces in front of Duque were at least local lords or counselors. Duque dealt with them with a formal smile. However, Duque could instinctively feel the contempt in their bones. At first, one or two of them could be said to be misunderstandings, but towards the end, even Kale, who was by Duque's side, did not look too good. This was because more than one counselor could not help but use their spiritual force to test Duque. They seemed to want to know how Duque, with his weak strength as a Morning Star wizard, was able to become the deputy commander of the alliance. One had to know that unless the elven wizard Shenxing was of noble birth and had sufficient seniority, he would not even be able to become a counselor in the Silver Moon Council. Every person who made a move had their claws chopped off by Duque. It was like rock, paper, scissors. No matter what form of spiritual force you used, Duque could find a way to counter it in less than 1/10 of a second. Only then did they start to look seriously at Duque, who was too young from the perspective of humans and elves. Duque's focus was on Aurelia. With the help of the system Elf's voice filter and amplification, Duque could hear what the elves around Aurelia were saying. "Niece Aurelia, I heard that you're going to serve that human lord. Are you going to get a title? Have you decided where your fief is? Sister Aurelia, are you going to marry the deputy commander of the alliance? I'm so jealous of you." After listening for a while, Duque finally understood. This was a group of middle and low-level elven nobles, and they were somewhat related to the Windrunner family. He was different from those high and mighty upper-class nobles who flaunted themselves at their own cost. The nobles with fiefs in the southern part of the Long Song Forest suffered the most this time. The forest, which had not changed for thousands of years, was burned down, and a large number of people were killed. It seemed that the royal family and the parliament members, who had also suffered heavy losses, did not intend to support these poor people. The bitter days ahead were predictable. Quel Salus was also situated in an awkward location. It occupied the northernmost part of the continent, and bordered the continent's most powerful human kingdom, Lordaeron, in the south. There was no room for expansion at all. If they couldn't survive, the hearts of the people would naturally change. They tried their luck and came to Illyria to find out what was going on. Aurelia was embarrassed. In fact, it was only a few days ago that she decided to follow Duque. She didn't know what position she would get after the so-called transfer, and whether she would get a title or not. Of course, she knew that Duque would not give them the cold shoulder. It was just that she was too busy these days, and that thing happened. Seeing Aurelia stunned, the expressions of these relatives were different. Some were curious, some were expectant, some were smirking, some were perfunctory, some were meaningful. Most of them were pessimistic. In the human world, there had never been a precedent of giving a title to a foreign race. They should be tricked into selling their lives for the humans, right? At this time, Duque came over. When he was still a dozen steps away, Duque said with a smile, "Oh, my countess, you are here." Countess? This distinguished title belonged to Aurelia? No matter what country, a person who could get to the rank of countess could never be called a small noble. At this time, a female elf asked half-jokingly, "Honorable Grand Duke Marcus, Aurelia is our Windrunner family's most beautiful and powerful ranger general. You can't look down on her. Don't tell us that Aurelia can't even get a piece of land. How is that possible? Aurelia is the most important person to me." Duque did not hesitate. In front of these long-eared elves, he took out a certificate of land. On it was an autograph of King Lang and the royal family's fire seal. Seeing that Duque's theoretical fief was so huge, all the elves were shocked. Well, as you wish. By the way, let me tell you, my Countess of East Elven Forest fief is here. Duque gently held Aurelia's hand with his left hand and circled the map with his right. This circle did not scare the elves to death. According to the map, this was already a forest of more than 1,000 square kilometers. How was this a countess' fief? Calling it a duke's fief was too big. Aurelia actually became a real duke of a human kingdom? This news was like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples. If they did not know that the old territories of Stormwind were still in a state of collapse, the elves would probably be in an uproar. However, this was also hope. Duque came quietly and left quietly, leaving behind a group of even more eager Windrunner relatives. Late at night, after the banquet ended, Duque returned to the state guest house, only to find Gavin Rad stammering and scampering away near the door of the room. This could only mean one thing: Aurelia was here. The melodious sound of a harp came from the room. The ranger and the harp were the best combination. God had blessed them with the most flexible fingers, and the superb fingering required to pluck the strings was as easy as eating and drinking. However, it was different from any song that Duque had heard before. The sound of the harp in the night was indeed melodious and delicate, but it seemed to be narrating an endless sad story. Aurelia, what happened? Putting down the harp, Aurelia walked lightly to Duque and hugged Duque. Duque could clearly feel the rapidly expanding wetness on his shoulder. My parents died in battle. It was a light sentence, but it was like a bolt from the blue to Duque. According to Duque's memories of Aurelia's history, the one who should have died in battle was her youngest brother, Ryrus. Now that Lilith was fine, Duque had confirmed it repeatedly before the banquet. Who knew that it was her parents who had sacrificed themselves? Didn't I repeatedly tell you to evacuate your relatives? Duque's body trembled along with Aurelia's. Yes, they actually arrived at Silvermoon City a long time ago, but they went back without us knowing. As a ranger lord, Aurelia choked. I know that this is their responsibility and their honor, but I can't control myself. Tonight, I feel so uncomfortable that I'm going crazy, but I have no choice but to pretend to be the most dignified and noble. I have to put on a smile to face all the guests and deal with the distant relatives who can't live on anymore. Chapter 407. No wonder. Duque had heard Aurelia play the harp more than once. Most of the time, he could tell that Aurelia was singing about the beautiful life of the elves in Quell, Thras, reminiscing about the peaceful days when they walked in the forest. Most of the time, he could tell that in order to protect this beauty and peace, Aurelia did not hesitate to risk her life. But now, the beautiful forest and her hometown were burned to the ground, and her parents died in battle. Duque had never experienced the sudden death of a loved one, and he could not understand how it felt to have a loved one who had accompanied him for thousands of years suddenly die. At this moment, Duque fell into a state of remorse and self-blame. He had never seen Aurelia's parents, and he did not imagine what kind of situation it would be after seeing them. But the Aurelia in front of him, drowned in tears and sorrow, really existed. Looking at that beautiful and sad face, Duque's self-blame in his heart grew heavier. If only I had done a few more steps, even if I had to tie them up, to ensure the safety of Aurelia's parents, then it would have been better. If only I had not allowed the tribe to attack Quell Salis, perhaps such a tragedy would not have happened. If only, after coming to this world, especially after becoming the Alliance's deputy commander, Duque had told himself more than once that he was a man of great things. For the future of himself and Azeroth, he could not be soft-hearted. It was with such a mentality that Duque could calmly look at the life and death of tens of thousands of people, or even hundreds of thousands of people. Because in Duque's heart, these people should have died in history. I did not kill these people, but I saved more people who should have died or died tragically. For example, Lang, who should have knelt long ago, or the fourth son of the Windrunner family, who should have been killed by Talon Gorefiend. In the end, Duque was still the young transmigrator. He was also often proud of his achievements. But now, when death really happened to the people around him, Duque found that he still couldn't take it. Duque's mind was in a mess. At this moment, a slender finger pressed against Duque's lips. "I'm sorry, I've always been too demanding on you. I want you, who carries the future of the world's humans, elves, and dwarves, to accompany me in my madness. I know you can't do it, but I still want you to extinguish the forest fire." Tonight, Aurelia was very weak. In front of Duque, she was no longer the smart and capable ranger general. She was not the Valkyrie on the battlefield. Instead, she was a weak woman who needed comfort. Her bright red lips parted slightly, and Duque unexpectedly kissed her. It was very, very soft to the touch, but it had a kind of inexperienced and clumsy feeling. However, Aurelia still responded positively to Duque. Duque suddenly felt that Aurelia's body was a little cold. He didn't know why. Although he knew that he was taking advantage of her, Duque had a feeling that if he let go, he would regret it for the rest of his life. Slowly, Duque's hands began to explore. At this moment, Aurelia, whose vital part was touched, suddenly tensed up. Then her eyes gradually brightened, and brightened again. It was a look of temporarily forgetting the pain and confusion in her eyes. She pursed her lips tightly and then, a little abruptly, she smiled. "Damn it, I'm really not like myself now." Although she was still crying, a sincere smile appeared on her face. "My name is Aurelia Windrunner, the head of the Windrunner family. The heroine of the Troll War. If I cry like a weak person for comfort, and then some bad guy takes advantage of me, then I'm too weak. Duque, don't you always call me the Great Demon King in secret?" "Ah." Duque shook his head decisively, refusing to admit it. "Then I'll give Duque Hero a chance to challenge the Great Demon King. Remember, the chance to challenge the Great Demon King doesn't come every day. If you fail this time, you'll have to wait 1,000 years for the next chance." 1,000 years? The future Azeroth was a dangerous world that could be destroyed 100 times a year. 1,000 years, Duque decided to do it. Seeing Duque's fighting spirit, Aurelia had a crying and laughing expression. "Look at your small body. I don't need to bully you in close combat. I won't attack you, and I won't leave this room. As long as you catch me, the Great Demon King will be at your mercy." It settled then. The battle began. At first, Aurelia was still thinking if she should go easy on him. In the end, she realized that she was thinking too much. If she couldn't attack the sorcerer's body, Duque had 10,000 ways to deal with her. The shameless Duque instantly froze the entire room. The ice kept increasing in size, quickly reducing the space in the room. Aurelia gave up after dodging a few times. She put her hands on her waist, looking like she was going to fight Duque head-on. As the most charming woman among the Windrunner sisters, her figure was also the most voluptuous. The hygel peaks on her chest perfectly displayed the beauty of the large arcs and the violence of the mass. However, when it reached the waist, it softly narrowed, and further down, it outlined another perfect arc. Aurelia crooked her finger at Duque. Suddenly, a system notification appeared. Aurelia Windrunner used, "Do you want to activate the boss battle mode?" Duque randomly clicked a yes. The host has transformed and temporarily switched to a warrior. Used touch on Aurelia. You received 10 rage points. Aurelia is trying to use her strength to suppress you. You used armor break on Aurelia. Even though Duque had only played as a warrior for a few days before he transmigrated, he knew that a warrior could quickly establish aggro on a boss and make the boss only attack them. Used armor break on Aurelia. You destroyed her outer armor. Used armor break on Aurelia. You destroyed her chest armor. Used armor break on Aurelia. You destroyed her crotch armor. After 3 armor break S, the warrior Duque realized that he couldn't use armor break anymore because there was no place to use armor break. At this time, Duque's attacks didn't seem to be going smoothly. Aurelia smiled lightly. Your attack was parried by Aurelia. She used counterstorm on you. Your armor value has already fallen to a dog. At this time, Duque shouted in his heart, "Hey, system elf, Is there any way to increase my strength? I want to crush this woman. Host, you can try to use the magic circuit to control your body, but this will. Duque didn't hesitate for even half a second and did as he was told. Suddenly, Duque realized that his strength was completely above Aurelia's. Faced with Duque, who suddenly took the wrong medicine, Aurelia's expression changed greatly and she hurriedly tried to retreat. The boss Aurelia is trying to escape. Do you want to give chase? The system elf asked considerately. Nonsense. Of course I want to give chase. However, I really haven't seen such a stupid boss. She actually exposed her back. The next moment, Duque temporarily changed his profession to thief. He directly locked Aurelia's waist and used the thief's godly skill, backstab, on Aurelia. The system notification came again. Congratulations, you have obtained the first blood of the great demon king Aurelia. Duque, you be *starred. Aurelia scolded. Duque used his temporarily obtained strength to completely suppress Aurelia. He directly used 998 consecutive backstab on Aurelia. Chapter 408. This was a touching battle between the hero and the Demon King. At the end of the battle, the great Demon King cried. She told all her grievances, sadness, and unhappiness to the brave man who had conquered her. Then, there was the inexplicable battle between the hero and the Demon King. Until she was exhausted, the sun shone into the room. The ice around the room was like a prism, reflecting the light of dawn. As if waking up from a hangover, Aurelia pushed away the thing that was pressing down on her and making it hard for her to breathe. She looked into the distance. The room was sealed in ice. Surprisingly, there was not much cold air leaking out of the ice, indicating that the owner still had good control over the ice. Not only that, Aurelia also sensed that there were several air vents at the top of the room to prevent the person inside from suffocating to death. Looking outside through the thin ice wall, all the scenery was hazy and beautiful. Aurelia felt like she was dreaming. She forgot all her sorrow and unhappiness and was immersed in the beautiful dream of a human named Duque. Duque? Aurelia dug her fingers into her long blonde hair. Only now did she suddenly realize what had happened last night. She finally found the thing that she had pushed away and thrown to the side of the bed. Damn. Duque, what happened to you? Aurelia screamed. Duque's whole body was stiff, like a corpse that had been dead for a long time. Only his shifty eyes, which were rolling around bitterly, could see that he was still alive. Aurelia suddenly found that there were a few lines of words written with arcane energy in the air. It was written in the common language. Last night, I went overboard. In order to gain power, I used the magic circuit to strengthen my body. Now my whole body hurts. Aurelia burst out laughing. She even forgot to cover her beautiful body and let the Hyjal peaks tremble. Duque was so excited that his eyes were wide open. Unfortunately, he could only stare. Aurelia quickly wrapped herself in the blanket and carried Duque to the bed. Then she lay on her side and slept next to Duque. She gently drew circles on Duque's chest with her index finger. Of course, it was not a curse, but something to do. I'm sorry, Duque. I've completely lost my rationality these days. I used my personal relationship to force you to do all kinds of irrational things. During this period, I only remember that you are the only person who can help quell the loss, but I forgot that you are also the deputy commander of the Alliance and the Grand Duke of Stormwind City. You also shoulder the future of humanity and the future of the Stormwind Kingdom. Duque typed with arcane energy. It's okay. Helping the Elven allies is still the general direction of the Alliance, so my subordinates, my friends, and the other kings still support me. Aurelia lowered her head. This is different. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If I go too far, I go too far. I will deeply reflect on myself. However, I have become very, very hateful of the Horde. I think I will eagerly participate in the war between the Alliance and the Horde until I kill all the Horde and kick those hateful green-skinned people back to their planet. On this point, we are in agreement. Only a Horde whose bones are burned clean after death is a good Horde. Duque continued typing. Then, the air rippled with silence. That's right, Duke typed an ellipsis in the air, as if he hadn't had enough. Aurelia let out a pleasant laugh like a proud phoenix. Tisk, little guy. You only overthrew the great demon king once, and you want to claim that you conquered the great demon king? You want to marry me? You want the great demon king to be your woman? Kid, you are still too young. I'm a windrunner? I'm the symbol of the wind. Have you ever seen the wind stay in a certain harbor? You want to have me in the future? Sure. Wait until I'm in a good mood, otherwise... Aurelia let out a triumphant laugh. Duque realized that he was still taking things for granted. What happened to the saying that if you marry a chicken, follow the chicken, and if you marry a dog, follow the dog? But on second thought, this was Aurelia Windrunner, the heroine who was qualified to have a statue in Stormwind City's King's Valley in history. If she was like those weak young ladies, she wouldn't be Aurelia, but some unknown and tragic noble daughter. Duque felt relieved. But he suddenly found that Aurelia had pulled down the blanket, once again showing her infinite beauty and a naughty smile. You little brat, you cheated and used magic to bully the great demon king last night, didn't you? Now, the great demon king you speak of is going to counterattack. With that, Duque immediately felt a terrifying pressure, as if a mountain was pressing down on him. It was as long as 3 seconds. Aurelia was actually also an idiot. Duque had gone overboard, but so had she. It was as if she wanted the pain in her body to surpass the pain in her heart. She fought with all her might last night, but now she was in excruciating pain. She just wanted to bully Duque, but the moment she touched him, she rolled on the bed in pain. In the end, the two of them stared at each other until the sun was high up in the sky before they recovered. They tidied up their clothes in embarrassment, like prisoners going to the execution ground, facing the gazes outside. The only good thing was that there weren't many people outside, just 2. One was the little handmaiden Vanessa, who was expressionless on the surface and looked at Duque as if she was looking at a villain, with disdain in her eyes. The other was Lucia, who was elegantly sipping the best black tea while waiting for Duque. Seeing Duque and Aurelia come out together, and glancing at their expressions, Lucia seemed to have an indescribable feeling. The eldest daughter of the Bear family adjusted her mentality well. She was still the dignified and generous Lucia, Duque's female disciple and spokesperson at this moment. Lucia first bowed to Aurelia with the etiquette of a hostess, and then briefly explained what happened in the morning. Prince Kale, that's came to see you this morning, master. I politely declined him on the grounds that you were using magic to communicate with the kings overnight for a war conference. In addition, there were 7 counselors who left visiting invitations and gifts, which I have temporarily put away for you. Finally, General Windsor wishes to receive your next instructions. Duque pondered for a moment. It is also time for us to leave Cuel Salis. Duque finished and looked at Aurelia. To be honest, Duque had enough of the High Elves' arrogance and various kinds of idiocy. If it was not for the 3 Windrunner sisters who shone in history, Duque would never have tolerated the High Elves' arrogance. The eldest sister, Aurelia, was one of the 5 heroes of the expeditionary army. The second sister, Sylvanas, ruled over the forgotten in history, and later became the chief of the tribe. The third sister, Windsor, was the leader of the most hardcore hawks in the Alliance, the Silver Covenant, and was the vanguard against all kinds of foreign enemies and tribes. The 3 of them were the top talents, 1 in a million. If it was not for them, would Duque have come to suffer like this? However, it was time to leave now, and he had confirmed that most of these elves were fellows who deserved to die. Duque no longer had any reluctance to leave. Facing Duque's gaze, Aurelia took out a blue badge and wore it on the left shoulder of her ranger cloak. Aurelia said proudly, I am Windrunner, the Ranger General under Grand Duke Marcus of Stormwind, Aurelia Windrunner. Chapter 409. The intensity of the war at the Dark Portal in the past 2 years was unprecedented. Although the commanders could see the decline of the Horde on several battlefields, the alliance that was on the defensive seemed to be in danger. The bronze-bearded dwarves of the southernmost Iron Furnace fort, Kilrog Deadeye of the Bloodring clan, had changed his strategy. He began to use iron from the iron mines to forge armors for the unworthy laborers in the eyes of the tribe. He completely armed them and used the method of exchanging lives for the bronze-bearded dwarves. In the southeast of Lordaeron, the Arthi Highlands had almost completely fallen. The Torrent Castle looked like it could fall at any time. The Horde transferred a large number of new warriors and laborers through the Dark Portal. Rend Blackhand was smart for once. He gave up on attacking the Torrent Castle and let the laborers dig into the mountain. The Torrent Castle was located on the largest hill of the Arthi Highlands. Except for a few places, most of the mountain roads to the Torrent Castle were more than 45 degrees. It was easy to defend and hard to attack. But digging into the mountain hit the Torrent Castle's weak spot. Without the support of the earth, the ground outside the Torrent Castle began to collapse. The sinking ground spread in all directions, and the houses overturned. A large amount of debris poured down to the foot of the mountain. The only good thing was that the Torrent Castle was the capital of the Arathar Empire. Its defense was the best in the entire continent, and even in the world. From inside to outside, there were a total of 5 walls. Even if the outermost wall collapsed, there were still 4 walls. At this rate, the Torrent Castle could still hold on for about half a year. Located between the Arthi Highlands and the Hillsbrad Hills, the Horde's offensive was very fierce. Regardless of the quality of the soldiers, the Horde had brought more than 200,000 people. Under the continuous attacks of all kinds of newly built thick and hard siege weapons, General Abendis of Lordaeron could not hold on. Now, it was the allied forces of Lordaeron, Stormwind and Alterac who were guarding the Torrent Castle. Further north, near the holy city of Stratholme, Duque was at the northern watchtower. Now, the northern fortress was facing an unknown number of Horde. Duque was not sure if Orgrim's main force was in front of him. But Duque could not do anything about it. This was because the Horde's army was in Zul Mashar, which had always been the territory of the Mossflayer trolls. No one knew how Orgrim managed to convince the remaining Mossflayer trolls to join the Horde. In any case, there were trolls, ogres, Gorin, who was known as the Great Ogre, and a large number of Red Dragon Knights. A large number of elite troops of the tribe were there. Even if Duque launched a tentative attack, he would still suffer heavy losses. Duke told Kudrin to do a reconnaissance flight, but it turned into a large-scale aerial battle that caused the sky to dim and the earth to dim. The Alliance had lost close to 300 griffins. Of course, the Horde wasn't doing too well either. More than 100 red dragons had been killed. Just like that, on almost all fronts, the Alliance was forced into a passive defensive position. Every day, human lives were disappearing with the momentum of a broken dam. The distress letters from the front line flew to the 2 Alliance commanders like snowflakes. In fact, the war between the Alliance and the Horde was like 2 ferocious beasts tearing each other apart, constantly inflicting wounds on each other. Now, it was not a matter of who could deal the fatal blow to the other, but who could last longer. The last one standing in the duel ring would be the winner. Be it Anduin or Duque, they were both in a terrible state, but they had to appease the kings. Duque did not conjure up the magic lanterns of thousands of troops. In response to King Salas of Stormguard's request for help, Duque made Dylanjun pay a little bit of money. Through the secret passage near the coast, he sent dozens of 7-pounder cannons that were originally used on warships to Stormguard. These 7-pounder cannons greatly increased the defense of Stormguard. At least against Gorin, they were not that weak. As for King Eden of Alterac, Duque looked down on him. Damn it, the Horde has not even reached your borders yet. What do you mean by sending 10 distress letters every day? In fact, Duque also understood that when King Tarinas forced a few lords to bring their weak private soldiers to join Duque, Duque had already completed the defense of the eastern plague lands in the future. And the further west they went into the densely populated areas, the stronger the defense of the kingdom of Rotterdam. Unless Orgrim and his 50,000 men could really overcome all the obstacles, it would only be a joke for them to fight their way through the entire eastern and western plague lands and cross thousands of kilometers to reach the kingdom of Rotterdam, which was located in the center of the Tirisful forest. Of course, Orgrim could also count on Grom to suddenly use the trapped horde to break through the main force of the Kingdom of Rotterdam along the northern line of defense of the Silver Pine Forest. On the March map, no one could imagine how the horde would reach the Kingdom of Rotterdam. But there was actually a third way. That was to return to the hinterlands, go west through the Poison Fog Canyon and Icewind Mound, cross the Alterac Mountains, and reach the Kingdom of Rotterdam. Looking at this route, Duque was in a daze for a long time. In the end, he called Elugia over and handed her a letter that he had already written. "Bring this letter to your father in Cair Darrow. Gavin Rad will accompany you. Remember, you are now the adjutant of the Alliance's deputy commander. If you are detained, if necessary, I will personally lead the army to get you back." Elugia was completely dumbfounded. What did Duke mean by this? Duke pulled Elugia over and whispered a few words into her ear. For the first time in her life, the eldest daughter of the Barra family, who had always looked calm and collected in the face of danger, fell into the deepest fear. "Don't worry. Since I have foreseen it, this is just an insurance." "Insurance?" Elugia's lips were still pale. "Don't worry. If it really happens, I have a way to turn the situation around." July 13th, Year 2 of the Dark Portal. Near Icewind Mound, the Horde's great chief Orgrim led his guards down a small mountain path towards a small valley below. It was late at night, a time when most people were already asleep. Orgrim also hated the lack of sleep. It made him seem irritable and not clear-headed. Unfortunately, there was an urgent matter waiting for him. Two tall and slender silhouettes appeared in front of Orgrim, causing his guards to jump in fright. He immediately realized that they were the troll scouts he had sent out. When it came to scouting, the agile trolls were obviously better than the clumsy and crude orcs. Therefore, when Orgrim found out that there was another group of trolls in Masazal who were unwilling to follow Zujin, and that they could be recruited with some food, Orgrim did not hesitate to recruit more than 1,000 Mossflayer trolls. "Great Chief, we found the target," the troll scout said. Chapter 410. It was a valley. To be more precise, it was not a valley. It was more like a small pit. It was about 6 meters wide and 5 meters deep. It was surrounded by cliffs and rocks, forming a perfect shelter. That was probably the reason why they chose to meet here. Orgrim and his two most trusted and powerful guards were hiding at the edge of the pit. His troll subordinates scattered a lot of leaves and smelly things on him. As much as the great chieftain disliked these things, he and his guards put up with it. Not long after, he heard a sound. Following the direction of the sound, Orgrim saw a creature the size of an orc laborer clumsily moving towards the bottom of the valley. Orgrim gripped the Doomham in his hand tightly as he stared at the newcomer cautiously. The creature leaned against the cliff and panted heavily. Then it stood up and looked around. "Hey!" the cloaked figure called out softly. "I'm here," Orgrim replied. He stretched his body and crawled out from the pile of leaves to the empty area at the bottom of the valley. The mysterious figure stood up straight. When he got closer to the chief, his breathing quickened. Orgrim also noticed that there was a short axe hanging on the man's waist. It was a completely different item compared to the troll's junk. It was well made and had no signs of wear. It was obvious that the man had never used it before. Are you Doomhammer?" The man stammered, his body involuntarily shrinking back. "Can you speak the common language?" "I am Orgrim Doomhammer, the leader of the Blackrock clan, the chief of the tribe. I can understand your language." Orgrim used the standard common language to answer. "And are you the one who sent me the secret message?" This was a secret meeting. In theory, no third party would know about it. Unfortunately, this so-called theory was as clear as a lighthouse in the dark to a certain shameless transmigrator. In the hastily built northern fortress, Duque was sitting in the highest room in the highest tower. People in this era did not have the concept of ventilation. Duque only felt comfortable when he was at a high place. Duque lightly tapped the table with his index finger as he felt the cold wind that almost forced its way in through the firing hole. A cold breeze blew past Duque's back. Duque didn't even turn his head to know who it was. "Yo, my dear, how was your harvest today?" Aurelia's face reddened. She pretended to be indifferent and snorted, "Humph! Who's your darling?" Duque facepalmed. He was also puzzled. How could a mature and beautiful domineering woman suddenly change into a tsundere? "But judging from your expression, you must have had a good harvest, right? Fortunately, I killed a few twin-headed ogres with my double arrow. Now they've all retreated into the mountain paths." The twin-headed ogre was very difficult to deal with. Not only was its skin thick enough to block ordinary swords, but it also had 2 heads and 3 hearts. Either one of its heads or all 3 hearts were pierced through. Otherwise, the ogre would not die. Duque had seen it with his own eyes. An ogre whose chest had been pierced by 2 crossbow bolts struggled to use a large wooden stick to break the crossbow bolts that were as thick as a human's arm. It got up and charged towards the humans for hundreds of meters before it was surrounded by a large group of soldiers with steel pikes. It was stabbed dozens of times before it died. Only someone like Aurelia, who had stepped into the realm of heroes, could deal with the twin-headed ogre easily. "Good job, kill more of them. It'll be much easier for us in the future." "It's your fault for not letting us in." Duque laughed. "I'm just afraid that you guys will kill them all too quickly. Then I won't be able to ask Tyrrhena's for more troops." Duque's way of doing things was a bit like raising bandits to protect himself. It was because of the threat of the horde that Duque and Tyrrhena's were able to force the lords of the eastern part of Lordaeron to pay up. These bastards knew that the Silver Pine Forest was under threat, but they were still slacking off. They didn't want to pay up, but they didn't want to. Now that the tribe was almost at their doorstep, these people panicked and hurriedly conscripted soldiers and paid up. Duque had all the manpower and money he wanted. Unfortunately, these lords were too late in mobilizing. They had gathered more than 40,000 people, but Duque found that only 1,000 of them were professional soldiers, less than 5,000 were militia who had received basic military training, and the remaining 30,000 were all farmers who had just washed their feet in the fields. The only good thing was that Lordaeron was so damn rich that they gave them 50,000 sets of armor and swords without any hesitation. These days, Duque had sent almost all of his subordinates who knew how to train soldiers to train these farmers. Aurelia didn't care either. She, her sisters, and more than 500 elven rangers slaughtered Zumashar's tribe every day. They only retreated when the horde sent out their wyverns. Hearing Duque say that he was afraid that they would wipe out the entire tribe, Aurelia couldn't take it anymore. "Hey, aren't there more than 50,000 Horde's main force inside? Orgrim ran away long ago. There's nothing inside except for less than 3,000 elites." "Huh," Aurelia exclaimed, and then her expression turned serious. "Then why don't you go after the Horde?" "It's not that I don't want to go, but I don't want to." Duque took out a very official letter. Aurelia glanced at it. "Your Majesty, Eden thinks that Alterac is not threatened by the Horde's army and refuses to let the Alliance in? The main force of the Horde is in Alterac." The female ranger was instantly agitated. "What the hell? Why won't Eden let us in? Is he an idiot? Is he as arrogant as those damned Silver Moon counselors? How can a small mountain kingdom be so arrogant?" Duque didn't say anything. He just opened a few magic images for Aurelia. When Illyria saw this, she immediately covered her mouth and cried out, "How tragic! Yes, very tragic." These images showed the tragic situation in various parts of Lordaeron. The desolate land was dead silent. The land was an intoxicating green, but there were no signs of birds or beasts. On the image was a huge human town. Now, a large number of scavengers were gathering. Vultures, crows, wild dogs, maggots. There wasn't a single intact wall in the huge town, let alone a roof. The corpses of Alliance warriors were nailed to the walls with crude spears. Judging from their armor, they had all died in a fierce battle. But their corpses were desecrated. It was obvious that the Horde beastmen had nailed them after they died. Chapter 411. In another scene, it was the once beautiful Silver Pine Forest. All the trees had either been burned or chopped down to the last. Between the 2 huge camps, there was a dead, uninhabited area for more than 5 kilometers. The earth was completely scorched, and so were the corpses. There were rarely any corpses on the battlefield that weren't black. The fire burned almost everything. Any corpses that weren't collected on the same day would be burnt in the battle the next day. Almost everything was burned by the fire. Any corpses that weren't collected on the same day would be burnt in the battle the next day. Aurelia couldn't take it anymore. You're just going to leave your compatriots' corpses in the wilderness? Many times, the tribes attacked the farmers who collected the corpses, and even the ogres ate the farmers alive. Aurelia was disgusted. Apart from the Dalajan and Alterac, almost all the countries in the Alliance have been affected by the war. Every country has suffered great losses. Because of the conscription, a lot of land is unfarmed. It's not hard to imagine that the coming winter will be terrible. The elf's long eyebrows drooped. Then what happened to our people? Duque was satisfied that the beautiful elf used the word our. He waved his hand. Come here. Let's talk. I'm warning you, you're not allowed to freeze the road, Illyria added with a lingering fear. Duque was a little embarrassed. As long as you don't run away. Ever since that night in the state guest house, Aurelia seemed to have a shadow in her heart. She refused to let Duque follow her, and whenever Duque made a move, she would run away quickly. Promise me first, Aurelia emphasized. Okay, I won't force you. Duque made a gesture of surrender. Only then did Aurelia sit down. Duque said in a low voice, actually, the situation in Stormwind is better than in most countries. Aurelia found it odd. Duque pointed at the map and said, the Hillsbrad Hills are one of the few areas that have not been affected by the war. Even though we have more than 600,000 refugees here, after we turn all the grasslands into fertile fields, we can basically have 80% of us become self-sufficient. Aurelia was about to ask what to do with the remaining 20%, but she suddenly realized that Duque was pointing at the western wilderness of the old Stormwind territory. Yes, this is the place. Duque smiled mysteriously. The Beastmen are a hunting race. They like to eat meat. On their planet, there are many huge and extremely large prey. Usually, one is enough to feed hundreds of people for a few days. Therefore, in their eyes, only lands with large amounts of wild prey were good territories. The western wilderness is too barren for them. When Duque said this, Aurelia couldn't help but burst into laughter. She had been to the western wilderness. Other than having more small monsters such as gnolls and wild wolves, the open plains were definitely the best place for humans to farm. The Horde prefers the elven forest, so when I asked my subordinate Edwin Van Cleef to build a base behind the enemy lines, he forbade everyone from going near the elven forest to farm. A large number of sentries and warning systems were set up 100 kilometers away from the forest. The area 200 kilometers away from the forest up to the sea is the planting area. Duque took out a report and said, this is the list of summer grain harvests. It's a pretty good result, enough for 600,000 people to eat for a year. Aurelia's beautiful eyes sparkled. Farming under the eyes of the Beastmen, Duque had thought of it and even done it. In order to prevent the grain from spoiling due to moisture during shipping, I also invented a method to transport the grain in rubber bags after it is dried. This can reduce most of the wastage on the sea. Previously, every bag of wheat would spoil on the way. Now, only one bag spoils for every 10 bags. Sitting in front of Duque, Aurelia rested her elbows on her knees and cupped her face in her hands. She stared at Duque and said, I really don't know where you get so many ideas from. Sigh, it's because you're so outstanding that I thought you were omnipotent. Ahem. Duque coughed dryly. I'm not the god of creation. All right, in your expectations, can we kill all the Horde? Duque spread his hands and admitted, we can win, but we can't kill them all. I've calculated that even if you kill every orc in the world of Azeroth, there are at least 2 million tribes on the planet called Draenor opposite the Dark Portal. Aurelia's expression was a little gloomy. However, I will let the flag of the Alliance be planted in every corner of Azeroth as much as possible. At this time, a slim figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Aurelia frowned and said, Servanas, how many times have I told you that our identities are different now? You have to knock on the door to see Duque. I really want to knock, but what if I miss something good? Queen Sylvanas had a sly smile on her face. Aurelia blushed and bit her lip gently. "Sister, that's enough." Duque smiled and asked, "Sylvanas, what's the matter?" "Nothing, I just want to confirm whether our Windrunner family's ranger is your free mercenary, or is he really your vassal?" "Sister, don't cause trouble for Duque." Aurelia was a little anxious. She thought that Duque was just helping her out that day. After all, in the human kingdom, there had never been a precedent of conferring a high elf as a hereditary noble. Queen Sylvanas shrugged and said, "We have more than 200 people joining. Many of them are just looking for hope. It's not like I want to ask. It's fine as long as I have a forest." "I see. Then I'll just give it to you all." Duque was prepared and took out a document. "Can one of you please call Sasha and Lilith over as well?" The Windrunner sisters were dumbfounded. This was a conferring document personally signed by King Lang Rin. As an almost independent duke, Duque had the power to confer titles below baron, but viscounts and counts had to be approved by the king. In this era, the nobles were the vassals of the king's vassals, not the king's vassals. Duque could have no more than 3 counts as his direct vassals, and Duque's vassals did not have to follow the king's orders. The Windrunner sisters did not expect Duque to move so quickly and actually get the document approved. Aurelia was the Countess of the East Elven Forest. Sylvanas was the Countess of the East Twilight Forest. Sasha's fief was the original Steel Lake, now Wind Lake, so she was the Countess of Wind Lake. Lilith's fief was the Blackwell Pumpkin Farm, so she was the Baroness of Blackwell. All hereditary titles. Chapter 412. Wow, it's an official hereditary title? Then I'm a lord now too? Ha! The third sister, Sasha, was the most excited. She took the document and looked at it carefully again and again. After confirming it, she was so happy that she spun around a few times. Lilith accepted it calmly and then bowed to Duque. Sylvanas put her hands on her hips and pouted. "Duque, you're so bad. You always give us land that's still under the control of the orcs." "I can't help it. The Horde's goal is to conquer the entire planet. If we don't defeat the Horde, no one in the Alliance will have a good time. The only thing I still have in my hands is Karazhan. How about I split it into a few layers for you?" Duke looked helpless. "I wouldn't want that creepy wizard tower even if you gave it to me." Sylvanas didn't have any bad intentions. She was just complaining. "If you don't want your land, then give it back to me." Duque purposely provoked Queen Sylvanas. Sylvanas stuck out her tongue. "I'm not doing it. If I really give it back to you, won't I have to work for you for nothing? No, I have to show off in front of my subordinates." With that, she ran away like the wind. "Wait, I'll go too." Sasha didn't want to be left behind and ran away too. Lilith silently bowed to Duque again and then left the tower with small steps. Thus, only Aurelia and Duque were left. Aurelia suddenly realized something. Her expression changed. "Aren't you giving us most of your land?" Duque laughed and pointed at the map. "No, to be honest, I don't care about land at all. In fact, Lang doesn't mind me being a king either. But when the enemy is right in front of us, it's not a good thing to split up and establish a country." Aurelia nodded. The strength of the various countries had already been weakened badly enough. If they still established a country and divided the manpower and resources of the various countries, they would be the sinners of humanity and even the entire alliance. Actually, Duque was ridiculing in his heart. The Burning Legion's invasion is almost certain. Do you think I'll just casually establish a country and court death? However, it's impossible for my territory to be so small. Duque pointed at the bottom right corner of the southern continent map of the Eastern Kingdom, where the Horde's base camp, the Swamp of Sorrows, and the newly renamed Blasted Land were marked. If we can successfully drive the Horde back to their homeland, but we can't destroy the Dark Portal, then there will be a problem. Who will guard the Dark Portal? The two of them had an answer in their hearts. It was definitely the Alliance, and it was most likely someone from Stormwind. It's either me or Lothar who's guarding this place. With the strange magical properties of the Dark Portal, I'm the only one in command. In exchange, Lang will definitely allow me to link my territory together. Duque drew a big circle with his right index finger. On the original foundation, he added the Redridge Mountain, the conquered Swamp of Sorrows, and the northern part of the Blasted Land. Although Duque's territory was larger than many of the territories of the kings in the alliance, Aurelia could tell at a glance that this was a hard job. This meant that if the Horde were to make any trouble, the one to bear the brunt would be Duque. At this moment, Aurelia looked at Duque as if she was looking at a saint. Duque, you're so great. With great power comes great responsibility. For the happiness of our descendants, we can only take on more responsibilities. Duque deliberately used the moral integrity of a Mediv. At this moment, Duque was a saint. Duque was the savior. For a moment, Duque was almost moved by himself. But, wait, our children and grandchildren? No wonder you're a hereditary count. You've never intended to give up your title and territory. Sweat. Waterfall of sweat. Super sweat. This was why it was bad for a woman to be too smart. One of the reasons why Duque was so generous with his land was that he didn't want the fertile water to flow into other people's fields. Perhaps, if he had a child with Aurelia, wouldn't the future lord be surnamed Du? Now it was seen through. No, I really didn't think that much. I'm just thinking of your people. Sometimes an explanation was a cover-up was a lie, and a lie was a conspiracy. Great. Don't tell me you want to make a move on my sisters? Are you itching for a beating? You haven't even taken care of me, the great demon king, and you're thinking so much. Wait, why did the topic change so much? I really don't have any thoughts about your sisters, I swear. Then he didn't know what happened. In order to prove his innocence, Duque kissed her. Aurelia seemed to be a little angry at first, but under the passionate kiss, her eyes gradually blurred. Then, for some reason, it became the second round of the Brave versus the Demon King. The battle with Aurelia was a private matter, after all. Following that, Duke began to make his preparations in secret. If he didn't guess wrong, that major event in history happened recently. It was the 16th of July. On this day, the entire Lordaeron continent was still filled with the flames of war, but the king of Alterac, Eden Pirinold, suddenly called for an emergency meeting. All Alterac generals and nobles above the count rank had to attend. You summoned us, your majesty? The one who spoke was General Haas, the commander-in-chief of Alterac's army. He stood at the half-open door of the palace. A group of generals stood behind the muscular General Haas. Through the wide-open door, they saw all the upper-class nobles of Alterac, led by Duke Barov, who had the most prestigious position among them, gathered together. Haas frowned slightly. He saw that the nobles had the same doubts as them. What matter would require all the nobles and generals to be gathered? If it was to allocate military funds or recruit militia, there was no need to summon all the important people in the military and government. The generals and nobles had a bad feeling. Come in, my generals. Eden spoke loudly. Everyone could feel that the king was trying to calm his voice, but it seemed to be unsuccessful. I just received an authoritative report that the main force of the Horde is indeed marching towards us. And the leader is their strongest chief, Orgrim Doomhammer. They've obviously chosen to cross the mountains to the north of Alterac to attack Lordaeron. This way, they'll be able to pass through the defensive line built by that brat Duque and approach Lordaeron from the southeast. Everyone immediately turned their attention to the huge map hanging on the side of the palace. It was so impressive that it covered the entire wall. Eden's voice sounded again. Now we have two choices. One is to face the invincible main force of 50,000 with less than 5,000 men, and the other is... Chapter 4:13. What was the second choice? When the first choice was made, everyone present realized what the so-called second choice was. Almost every noble and every general's face instantly turned as pale as a dead man's, without the slightest hint of blood. Traitor? How could this be? It wasn't that no one had ever been a traitor before. The Bloodsail pirates had done so, but it was later proven that they had been blackmailed. Not only did Deputy Commander Duque prove it, But the Bloodsail fleet had also sent over 100,000 beastmen to the bottom of the sea to wash away their shame. Now, their king was hinting for Alterac to surrender, or even worse, seek refuge with the Horde? How could this be? General Haas stood up straight, his heavy breathing causing his thick beard to flutter. We are part of the 9 nations of the Alliance. We have sworn to fight against the evil Horde with the other nations. Alliance? What can the Alliance do? King Eden waved his arms anxiously. I've sent 15 urgent letters to Lothar for help. Lothar told me every time that the Alliance's front line in the Silverpine Forest was unable to transfer more troops, and hoped that Alterac would coordinate with Deputy Commander Marcus. At this point, every general and noble pricked up their ears. All right, I used the most humble tone to ask for help from that brat who doesn't even have hair on his mouth. Guess how he dealt with me? 10,000 Stormwind soldiers and 10,000 Lordaeron soldiers? Damn it. They were still peasants 3 weeks ago, and it would take at least a week for them to reach Alterac. Bastard. The Horde's main force is right under our noses. Duke Barev's eyebrows twitched. General Haas seemed to want to defend Duque. Your Majesty, you know that Alterac's mountain roads have always been terrible. From receiving the news to sending reinforcements, Sir Marcus has already done his best. Shut up. Eden questioned loudly. Detecting the enemy's movements is that brat's responsibility. If he can't do it, then he's neglecting his duty. Where are they now when Alterac needs the Alliance? Let me tell you, not here. 7 days? Will they come to collect our corpses in 7 days? Faced with the threat of death, the nobles of Alterac trembled. We can hold our ground with Alterac's terrain. Hold fast. The king sneered. His next move made their fear rise to another level. With a wave of his hand, a frozen orc specimen that had been dead for a long time was pushed in from the side door by the guards on a cart. Eden gave a vivid example of what all the noble beastmen looked like. My god. They're as tall as the trolls, but as sturdy as 2 trolls. Damn, look at his muscles, his sharp fangs. Will he eat people? When the 3 guards forcefully brought in a huge warhammer and threw it on the ground, the floor tiles were smashed to pieces. All the nobles' faces were drained of blood. Their eyes bulged as they stared at the cracks spreading on the floor tiles. The king's voice rang out again. Do you see that? My vassals. It takes 3 people to lift their warhammers, but these guys are swinging our shields effortlessly like children's toys. No one could stop them. 7 days? What a joke. 7 days is enough for them to kill us all 3 times over. They've already destroyed Stormwind City, half of Kuel Salis, and swept through the earthy highlands. If we don't do something, their next target will be Alterac. A trembling noble asked, the Stormwind soldiers within our borders really can't do anything? When Lang's Stormwind army needed help, Alterac gave them food and even gave them their own land to take refuge. What did Lang do to us? For the sake of the holy light, they actually took root on the land we lent them for refuge. At this point, the nobles' expressions turned ugly. It would have been fine if it was just to save the refugees. As long as they blocked the food supply, they could force the people of Stormwind to become cannon fodder. But now, they saved the refugees, but the refugees seemed to have taken over the land and refused to leave. Opening up land and building a city, making their camp stronger than the Broken Ridge Castle on Alterac Mountain. Wasn't this like saving a bandit, and the owner was chased out? We joined the Alliance to obtain the power to protect our kingdom, but now that the Horde is right under our noses, where is our precious Alliance? They've already abandoned us, don't you understand? He knew that his voice was close to hysteria, and he tried to calm down. It's time for every kingdom to think for themselves. I have to think of Alterac's interests first. Any other king would have done the same. King Aiden's words made sense, and the nobles and generals were speechless for a moment. Alterac was the smallest of the 7 human kingdoms, with less than 10,000 soldiers. After losing a few regiments, Alterac was left with 5,000 soldiers and less than 100,000 citizens. They were no match for the Horde's ferocious main force. My generals, my vassals, the situation has changed, Aiden reminded everyone. Aiden reminded everyone, noticing that he was sweating as well. Almost everyone noticed it too. We don't have many choices. For example, Alterac will no longer be a part of the alliance. Believe me, this is pretty much the only option for us. For example, a non-aggression treaty. We will not disturb their advance in the mountains, and they will guarantee that Alterac will remain unscathed. Everyone below was shocked, and a violent uproar quickly spread. Most of the generals seemed to have fallen into disgust, anger, or sorrow, while the nobles looked uncertain. "Your Majesty, you're forcing us to become the slaves of those cruel, bloodthirsty beasts who only know how to slaughter cities. Sign a contract with those beasts." "Your Majesty, are you sure they won't get hungry and eat us first?" Aiden sharply noticed the shift in the vassal's thoughts. "I'm glad that the Horde's chief, Orgrim Doomhammer, is a wise leader who speaks the common tongue. I've obtained his promise not to attack us in exchange for us not cutting off their advance. Please note that we no longer have a choice. Everyone, please sign this contract to agree to our next actions. Let us Alterac embrace our destiny together." Chapter 4:14. No. I'm against this plan. Haas stepped forward agitatedly, but he was stopped by over 10 fully armed royal guards. "I won't agree. Alterac soldiers won't agree either. Then we'll use the excuse of shifting our defenses and send them away," King Eden said coldly. "I'm still against it." Haas was held down by several guards. He struggled and roared, "This is blasphemy against the entire human race." "Shut up. You swore to be loyal to me, even to the ends of hell." General Haas was stunned. "Can we trust the chief of the tribe?" A low-ranked noble, Valander, asked. His words represented the thoughts of many nobles. Seeing many nodding, Eden sighed in relief. If they asked this, it meant that they had already accepted the agreement. The only thing stopping them was their doubts about whether it could be carried out. "We have no choice," Eden replied slowly. "As long as they want, unless they give up on Alterac, we and everything we have will be destroyed. Of course, if they go back on their word, we'll still be finished. But if they stick to their word, Alterac will live. No matter what the price is. All right, make your choice. Gentlemen." Eden waved his hand, and over 100 royal guards rushed out from the side door, surrounding all the generals and nobles. No one knew what the consequences of refusing to sign the agreement would be, but it obviously wouldn't be anything good. It was obvious that the king had spoken to his hardcore faction. Over a third of the nobles and generals signed the agreement, stating that they unconditionally agreed to all of the king's policies against the alliance. They signed their names and stamped the wax. Once they sat on the king's chariot, it meant that once Eden officially fell out with the alliance, they would have to bear responsibility as well. The remaining two-thirds were hesitant. The neutral faction and Duke Barev's connections all looked at the other person in power in the kingdom, Duke Barev, whose power was second only to Eden. Duke Barev, who had been silent all this time, slowly raised his head like a rusty machine. The Barev family objects. Perhaps it was because of fear, but his voice was clearly trembling. It did not sound like his previous voice. Eden didn't mind. Anyone's voice would change under extreme anxiety and panic. Eden stroked the hilt of the sword at his waist and let out a long sigh. "My old friend, I'm sorry I didn't discuss this with you beforehand. From the way I see it, you've already made your choice when you gave little Elusia to that brat who stole the highest position in the alliance. Your heart is no longer with Alterac. Are you planning to ally with those damned refugees to steal Alterac's land and throne?" Like a bolt from the blue, Duke Barev was completely stunned. He looked at the king but could not say a word. "I'm sorry, but you can no longer represent the Barev family." The king clapped his hands, and two teenagers appeared from the side hall. Prince Barev stared at him with wide eyes. 15-year-old Wilton Barev and Alex Barev, the only two heirs to the Barev family. Now, they actually went over to the king's party. Wilton grinned hideously. "Father, you're old. It's time to hand over the Barev family to us." Alex did not hide her anger at all. "Father, you've gone mad. You're trying to hand over the family to Elusia, to that bastard Duque, and you won't even leave the family to us? Prince Berev raised the forefinger of his right hand and pointed it tremblingly at the emperor. A foul breath stuck in his throat, and he still could not utter a word. The outcome had been decided. Nobles were very particular about bloodlines. No matter how much Duke Berev struggled, he could not escape the shackles of his bloodline. Just as the old duke knelt down, almost all the nobles and generals stepped forward to sign their names and stamp their seals. Prince Berev's two good sons did the same thing in their father's presence, with great pride. King Eden, who had gained the support of everyone except Haas and the old duke, was obviously in high spirits. He showed everyone his excellent political skills. He showed everyone what it meant to turn the situation around. Everyone, I did not mean to force you. If I had a choice, I would not serve those horrible beasts. The contract signed by all of you is just insurance. Insurance. Do you understand? Everyone looked at King Eden in bewilderment. Eden finally showed his best actor talent. In fact, I have already informed Tyrrhenas about the Horde's main force's attack. I told him that if he did not have reinforcements, I would give up defending and let the Horde charge into Lordaeron. In the end, Tyrrhenas sent his last group of court mages and a group of high-grade swordsmen as soon as possible. I'm going to let them destroy the Horde's path. General Haas, who was kneeling on the ground, suddenly looked up. His eyes were full of hope. Your Majesty, you were just lying to us? You're not going to fulfill your promise? That's right. We don't have to fulfill our promise to those despicable beasts. Eden waved his right index finger proudly. No, I've already told Orgrim about the arrival of Lordaeron's reinforcements, including their numbers and types of troops. The entire hall fell into a dead silence. Eden's expression was incomparably cold and cruel. He raised the contract signed by the generals and nobles. Let them fight to the death. If Tyrrhenas' elites win, I'll burn this contract. No one will believe the evidence provided by those beasts. Many people heaved a sigh of relief when Eden said this. If the Horde is really that strong and kills all of Tyrrhenas' elites, then we've done our duty as allies since we informed Orgrim. We can join the Horde without worry. If the Horde won, wouldn't that mean that the last of Lordaeron's elite guards had been destroyed? What difference was there between Lordaeron and a weak girl who could be raped at will? Hiss. In the main hall, there were countless sounds of inhaling cold air. They suddenly realized that this was the king they were familiar with, the cunning and astute king. Regardless of the situation, Alterac would be the winner. For a time, the hall was filled with heated discussions. Almost every noble and general had a smile on their faces. To be able to turn such a huge crisis into a sure win, as expected of His Majesty. As expected, this is the way of survival for us Alterac. A group of people complimented King Eden as sickeningly as they could. At this time, Eden suddenly received a message. The Horde's messenger had arrived. Chapter 4:15. Eden frowned as he listened to the servant's words. This wasn't within his expectations. He ordered the guard, tell the tribe's envoy to wait for a while and arrange for them to be in the secret parlor. I'll meet them later. What the king didn't expect was that the moment he finished speaking, a voice that sounded like a human's voice came from the entrance of the hall. Didn't King Pirold decide to make Alterac the strongest member of the tribe? As a member of the tribe, there shouldn't be anything you need to hide from me, right? The 15-meter-tall, 3-meter-wide door was kicked open. Accompanied by this rumble, a loud and clear commotion suddenly came from outside the huge castle, followed by the sound of countless giant birds flapping their wings in the wind. The tribe's envoy appeared under everyone's panicked gaze. What envoy? That was a joke. No envoy would be as burly as this orc, emitting such a terrifying aura. He had reddish-brown skin that was different from most orcs, and he carried a huge black square hammer on his shoulder. The most frightening thing was that the hammer was stained with incomparably fresh flesh. With every step he took, a drop of blood or a small piece of flesh would fall from the hammer. Ooh. Who are you? For a moment, the king almost wanted to order his guards to kill him. An orc had entered Alterac's palace, and if he was allowed to leave in such a dignified manner, it would be like mud falling on his pants. This was completely out of Eden's expectations. The consequence of this was that Alterac could only follow the tribe to the very end. The huge orc grinned, revealing a mouthful of intimidating fangs. Aiden Pirinold, didn't you send a messenger to pledge your loyalty to me? My subject, I'm only here to express my joy at receiving your loyalty. Is that wrong? The king's face turned pale, cold sweat drenching his luxurious clothes. Orgrim Doomhammer? Eden's teeth chattered as a magical name leaked out from the cracks of his mouth. Who would have thought that the great chief of the tribe would come to visit in person? Was this a forced abdication or a showdown? Or was it both? Aiden, my loyal subject, thank you for your information. Along with Orgrim's mocking words, a burly orc beside Orgrim, who had a severed hand and had turned his hand into a giant toothed blade, threw out a head with a sinister smile. It was Chaz Mat, King Menethil's personal court archmage. Someone recognized the severed head. At this moment, Eden felt that all the sweat he had shed had been frozen by the cold air. It's over. It was all over. He didn't expect that the tribe, which was supposed to be 2 days away from them, would organize a sneak attack. Now that even the Radiant Moon Mage leading the team had been killed, the mages from the Rotterdam Kingdom who had been arranged to camp at the north of the Shattered Ridge were probably dead. Eden simply couldn't imagine how the tribe had managed to do all this without making a sound. However, it was clear that Orgrim's preemptive move had disrupted all his plans. Now, he only had 2 choices left. One was to resist and let Orgrim, who was already prepared, destroy his entire family. The other was to keep his promise and let Alterac join the tribe, and then walk all the way to the dark side. In the future, he would either be destroyed by the victorious alliance, or he would join the tribe and beg the tribe to give him a piece of meat after conquering the world. In fact, it wasn't just Eden's subjects who were hesitating. Eden himself was also hesitant. Even though Orgrim was considered a handsome man among the beastmen, he was still too ugly and horrifying in the eyes of the humans. Eden couldn't help but shiver when he thought about how he had to lower himself to work for such a terrifying fellow. He couldn't help but feel a wave of unwillingness rise from the bottom of his heart as he stared at those mottled, sharp teeth. What if he could capture the chief of the tribe and use him as a hostage to prevent the tribe from attacking until the alliance's reinforcements arrived? If he succeeded, he, Eden Pyreus, would undoubtedly become a great hero of the Alliance and the savior of the human world. His Alterac's reputation would greatly increase, and it would become a powerful country on par with Lordaeron. This idea was so tempting that it made Eden's heart palpitate. He couldn't help but glance at the royal guards who had already drawn their swords and were waiting by the side of the hall. Dreams were beautiful, but reality was cruel. Eden, who had tried to play both sides, didn't even get 2 seconds before his dream of being a hero was shattered mercilessly. A green claw landed on his shoulder, the sharp tip of the claw pressing against Eden's artery. A huge, invisible figure appeared beside the king of Alterac. Ah! Eden let out a low cry. It was a sword sage of the Fireblade clan. He had the ability to become invisible, and he roamed the Alliance's command center all year round, killing many mid-level and low-level commanders. He was a notorious sword sage in the Alliance. All of a sudden, everyone was stunned. This mysterious green-skinned sword saint did not kill him immediately. Instead, he reached into King Eden's robes and took out the contract signed by all the nobles and generals in the kingdom. He then threw the contract to Orgrim, who was standing at the entrance of the hall. Everyone only saw a blur, and the contract was already in Orgrim's hands. The chief opened it briefly, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. The entire Alterac had fallen into the hands of the Horde. Whether it was to be destroyed or used, it was all up to Orgrim. Thank you all for your loyalty to the Horde and to me. I can make this promise as the great chief of the Horde. When the Horde rules over the world of Azeroth, everyone here will automatically become the Horde's agents to control the human world. A slap in the face, a carrot in the mouth. After intimidating them and controlling the situation, Orgrim cleverly adopted a more conciliatory approach. Rule over the human world. Below only 1 and above tens of thousands. It had to be said that this promise was indeed a beautiful blueprint for the Alterac nobles who had suffered for a long time in the 7 human kingdoms and had been ignored by the major countries for a long time. At least they had something to look forward to. All of a sudden, the eyes of the nobles lit up. Right at this moment, a teasing voice suddenly sounded out. "Yo, Orgrim, you're digging up the Alliance's foundation right in front of me. You really don't take me or the Alliance seriously." Chapter 416. Before he heard the voice, Orgrim had already prepared a script in his mind to give an impassioned speech. The humans slandered us for being barbaric, bloodthirsty, cannibalistic, and massacring, but it was actually the remnants of the Southern Kingdom that spread the rumors. He could brag however he wanted, as long as the humans did as he wanted and started a peasant uprising in the Hillsbrad Hills. This would hold back the troops and attention of the Stormwind and Dalaran kingdoms so that the main force of the Horde could successfully take down Lordaeron. As for what would happen to the people of Alterac, Orgrim couldn't be bothered to care. He had hoped countless times that his opponent would be a straightforward warrior. Only then would he be able to show off his and the orcs' bravery. It was a pity that apart from Lothar, who seemed to have the courage to fight head-on, he only met Duke from the start to the end. In the eyes of the Beastmen, Duke was extremely despicable, but it was undoubtedly a very effective strategy to kill the Beastmen. Since the human commander was so despicable, Orgrim didn't mind using the same method to deal with the humans. Conquering a human kingdom without shedding a drop of blood. Even if it was the smallest human kingdom. This achievement was exactly what Orgrim, who was in desperate need of glory, needed. He needed this achievement to prove himself. After all, the continuous defeats had tarnished his reputation. When Orgrim met the messenger, he was afraid that it was a trap, but he also wanted to control Alterac. That was why he mobilized so many powerful chiefs and heroes, and even used Zulahid's dragon knights to hold the fort. Everything went smoothly, and he easily subdued that sly and cunning king. But he didn't expect to hear the voice that he didn't want to hear the most, the voice of the Alliance's vice-commander, Duke Marcus. Not only did Orgrim's expression change, but Eden and Haas's expressions also changed. As people who had dealt with Duke many times, they could obviously recognize Duke's voice. But they didn't expect Duke's voice to come from Duke Barav. Duke Barav straightened his body. His face was full of mockery and confidence. Under everyone's astonished gazes, a wave of water-like ripples appeared on his body. The slightly plump elderly figure quickly disappeared, revealing a robust young man dressed in a blue and white robe. Illusion? How was this possible? It wasn't just the inexperienced orcs, even the upper echelons of Alterac were shocked. They could accept the fact that Duke had fooled them with his perfect makeup. It wasn't that the nobles hadn't seen illusions before, but those crude and immobile illusions were worlds apart from Duke's lifelike illusions. The most common type of illusion was the kind that attempted to conceal a certain secret passage. When had he ever seen an illusion with so many facial expressions? Just how high was Duke's attainments in magic as a mere morning star? What's more, Duke's appearance at the most critical moment made them have no choice but to add the word inconsolable to their shock, turning it into inconsolable. Orgrim was decisive. Not only was he wise in history, he was also an absolute opportunist. Playing dirty was definitely the chief's specialty. In this life, Duke didn't give him the chance to sneak up on the Blackhand Great Chief. However, that didn't mean that Orgrim wasn't sinister. Without even a greeting, Orgrim gave a look and a sword saint of the Fireblade clan came out of stealth, slashing at the back of Duke's neck with a sharp longsword. At the same time, Orgrim used charge, his burly reddish-brown body turning into a blinding ray of light as he charged at Duke. That's right. He wanted to kill Duke in an instant. He wanted to nip Duke, the biggest factor of instability, in the bud. After all, everyone present was a human, and his men had yet to completely control the palace. If Duke, the vice-commander of the Alliance, was allowed to raise his arm here, things would definitely develop in a direction that was disadvantageous to the tribe. However, he had miscalculated. Under the fierce attack of his giant hammer, It missed and clashed with the longsword of the Fireblade clan's Sword Saint in midair. The Sword Saint, who was hurriedly retracting his attack, was sent flying. Duque, who was supposed to be killed between the hammer and the longsword, turned into a ray of light and disappeared into the air. Or was it an illusion? Not good. Orgrim suddenly reacted and used his fastest speed to turn his neck towards Samuro, who was controlling the King of Eden. Unfortunately, before he could shout "Be careful," Samuro was already hit. Fast. Too fast. No one expected Duque to be this decisive. The moment he appeared, Duque had already disappeared from where he stood. The sorcerer's arcane spell, invisibility, gave Duque the ability to become invisible for a short period of time. The sorcerer's invisibility did not have the stealth and movement acceleration ability of the Sword Saint's wind step. However, Duque had been strengthened by the Storm Altar. The system notification in Duque's retina showed the following information: you have used the new skill, Gale Step. You can enter invisibility for up to 60 seconds. In invisibility, you can gain twice the movement speed and use Flash once without breaking the invisibility. When you make your first ice attack, your critical hit rate is 100% and your magic flying speed is increased by 50%. Duque's movement speed was not fast. In this state, Duque could run 100 meters in 10 seconds without any obstacles. Unfortunately, his agility was too low and he did not have good dynamic vision. This speed had to be discounted, especially in crowded places where it was easier to bump into them. Even so, it was still very scary. Duque raised his hand and cast an ice tornado in his invisible state, sending Samuro, who was caught off guard, flying. Originally, Duque wanted to kill Samuro instantly. Unfortunately, a hero was a hero. Even when he was being ambushed, Samuro was still able to use the mirror image spell in a split second in the eyes of bystanders. The ice tornado, which was strengthened by Ice Shield and Icicle, if both hit, with the Sword Saint's high attack and low defense, it would not be strange to kill him instantly. However, Samuro's mirror image spell prevented Duque's ice tornado from being fully effective. Even if it hit, it was only to the extent of hurting Samuro and sending him flying. Of course, at the last moment, Duque used an ice wall to block Samuro's slash towards the Eden King, scaring the Eden King half to death. In an instant, the situation reversed. It was Duque's turn to smile and put his hand on the Eden King's shoulder. "For the Alliance!" Duque shouted. Instantly, a group of killing gods charged in from the hall and the side door. Orgrim's expression changed. Chapter 417. In order to reclaim Alterac this time, Orgrim had put in a lot of effort. Other than Ghoul, Dan and Gujar, who were nowhere to be found, and Grum Hellhound, who was guarding the main camp in Silverpine Forest, who was unable to move, Orgrim had practically brought all of the tribe's most capable chiefs and heroes here through the Wyverns. The one commanding the Wyvern army in the sky was naturally Zulud. On Orgrim's left was the chief of the Shattered Palm clan, Kargath Bladefist. On the right was the chief of the Blood Ring clan, Kilrog Deadeye. Outside the hall was the chief of the Black Scar clan, Cashdrake, and a new hero, Rexer. Rexer was one of the greatest heroes of the tribe in the future. Rexer was the product of a union between an orc and an ogre. He grew up in the Mach Nathal clan of Draenor. Even though he was of mixed blood, his burly physique and amazing strength allowed him to shine during the Horde's invasion of Azeroth. This time, Orgrim had specially brought him here. Including Samuro, there were a total of 7 super killing gods from the tribe who could easily fight against 1,000 men on their own. Under normal circumstances, these 7 guys were enough to destroy the entire Alterac. Unfortunately, they had encountered Duque, who was also prepared to go all out. In the sky, Zulud suddenly discovered a large flock of griffins swooping down from the clouds. The Dragonmaw clan's dragon riders didn't even have time to react before they were smashed by a large number of storm hammers. It was true that dragons were the overlords of the sky, but they had a blind spot in their vision, and that was their backs. Without the coordination of the orc cavalrymen, the Crimson Dragons attacked the griffins on their own. This mistake caused the dragon riders' losses to increase dramatically. Cashdrake and Rexer, who were waiting outside the hall, thought that they only needed to deal with a few die-hard Barav clan guards. The two of them and the dozen orc elites they brought with them made a grave mistake. After the illusions on the guards were removed, Chin Fan's eyes widened. They found that the guards opposite them were all their old enemies, the Silver Hand Knights. It was fine if the Silver Hand came, but more than half of the first-generation paladins were here. Uther, Sidon Dathrahan, Tyrion Fordring, Gavin Rad Doom, Bolvar for Dragon. Most of these fellows had proven their bravery in the Silverpine Forest and other battlefields. After fighting for so long, all the weaklings would be eliminated in the first 3 battles. Most of the time, after fighting for so long, it would be discovered that the strongest ones were still the same few. Even if he didn't completely remember the other party's name, he would be able to recognize it as soon as he saw it. It's that bastard again. And so on. Everyone in the Horde agreed that the first-generation Holy Knights were the strongest. If it was just the Silver Hand, the heroes of the Horde would not have such a headache. The most ridiculous thing was that the 4 Windrunner sisters had all come. Paladins were famous for being able to fight, tank, and consume energy. However, Paladins also had a well-known shortcoming: short legs. If the heroes of the Horde really wanted to run, the Paladins wouldn't be able to stop them. Well, now there was a group of ranger heroes who could run as fast as they could. Even if Kargath and Kilrog charged out, they still felt like they couldn't hold them off. In just a single exchange, several elite captains of the Horde with dozens of lives on their hands were shot to death by the Windrunner sisters. The Horde was at a great disadvantage against the heroes summoned by Duque, but it was a great advantage against the other humans. Especially the Alterac royal family's guards. They were completely dumbfounded. Before this, they had been clearly told by Eden that they were going to rely on the Horde. That was why the heroes and followers of the Horde were like fathers in their eyes. Who knew that the Horde would just kill them like pigs and dogs? Orgrim glanced at Duque, who was beside the throne, and sighed in his heart. I've miscalculated. If Samuro was still controlling King Eden, then this would be the best time to force the Alterac people to rebel. But now it was Duque who had Eden's life in his hands. Eden was of course not an idiot. Duque had saved his life from Samuro's hands, but it wasn't just to save him. Did he really think that Duque was some *T saint? Whether he and his Alterac were willing or not, they were now sitting on the Alliance's chariot once again. Jump out of the chariot? Sure. Go and die now. As an overly shrewd, two-faced king, Eden shouted the moment he was sure of his own safety, for the Alliance. Kill those damned Horde. As expected of the best actor. Just a moment ago, he was saying, I love you, Daddy of the Horde, but now he was shouting, Grandpa Alliance is my real ancestor. He said it so smoothly, and his expression did not change, as if it was only right and proper. Even the most seasoned politician would be ashamed of himself. But he shouted in a dignified manner. Even when he saw Orgrim's infamous Hammer of Destruction smashing down on his head, and the huge black square mace rapidly expanding in his vision, he didn't change his words. Because King Eden had made his bet. It was true that Orgrim was powerful and could force Eden into a corner. But Duque was clearly superior. This kind of frightening method wasn't something a 16-year-old should be capable of. Eden couldn't turn back this time. He could only hope to keep Orgrim here and get a decent result. Then, he would think of a way to bribe Duque to make sure that no one in the Alliance would pursue him and Alterac. Duque appeared once again with Eden in a flash. In a flash of light, Eden was brought from his throne by Duque to the door of the side hall on the right. That was how agile a mage was when fighting a warrior. Duque smiled and waved at Orgrim. Then he raised his hand, and a 10-meter-tall, 2-meter-thick wall of ice separated the Orgrim tribe from the Alterac nobles. Hurry up and retreat. Duque's shout finally woke up the frightened nobles. These people who claimed to be nobles weren't as noble as the commoners thought they were. One by one, they fled in panic towards the side door where Duque was. With Duque blocking the tribe's way to the main hall, that was the only way out. Everyone fought to be the first to run in that direction. And then a storm began to rise. The Sword Saint's blade storm. Under Eden's frightened and wandering gaze, all of Alterac's upper nobles were cut to pieces by a beastman sword saint that had been hiding near the side door. Broken limbs, flying blood, minced flesh, the nobles who had once gathered under Eden's command and were viewed as his most important pillars had been completely wiped out in front of him. Chapter 418. The snow-capped mountains protected the snow-white shattered ridge. The cries of dragons and eagles clashed in the blue sky, the lightning and dragon's breath splitting the sky. Huge birds of prey and legendary dragons, which were rarely seen on normal days, fell from the sky like dumplings. The Alterac people hid in their houses, trembling and praying for misfortune to stay away. In truth, it was very difficult. From the moment the battle was set on Alterac Mountain, a lot of destruction was unavoidable. Perhaps Duque could have stopped all of this, but Duque chose to give up. Alterac King Eden's two-faced viper nature was right there. Even if Duque could save him once, he wouldn't be able to save him a second or a third time. Rather than letting Alterac Mountain become a ticking time bomb, it was better to clean it up in one go in the course of history that Duque was familiar with. The Crimson Dragon was like a bulldozer as it fell diagonally. Before the momentum of its high-speed fall had dissipated, the small houses were smashed into smithereens, leaving a wide black scar on the snow-white ground. Even when the Crimson Dragon crashed into the city walls of the shattered ridge, the momentum did not dissipate. The thick city wall finally acted as a gatekeeper. The giant dragon did not smash through the city wall. Instead, it rolled under the fierce impact and fell down the cliff in one breath. Red scales and broken limbs flew like bullets, sweeping away all the soldiers on top of the wall. The Alterac people below screamed in fear, feeling as if the world had collapsed. Other than a few people with good agility and balance, most people lost their footing and fell to the ground. In the Alterac capital city, many Beastman elites took the opportunity to fight in close combat, using their powerful arm strength to easily tear apart the royal family's guards who were caught in their punches and kicks. Amidst the chaotic screams, the guards watched in despair as a green shadow pressed down on them. They instinctively raised their shields to block the charge of a rhinoceros, but all of them failed. Every single one of them failed. Their arms and shoulders were crushed by the tremendous force that surpassed their limits. They screamed as they were grabbed by the elite orc warriors, their helmets, heads, and necks torn from their bodies. Blood covered the ground. When the complete battle formation collapsed, the shadow of death was right in front of the guards. Even though the number of Orgrim's guards was only a tenth of the Wang clan's guards, every single one of them seemed to be on drugs. They charged into the crowd and started a massacre. In low-level battles, Orgrim's men had the upper hand. In terms of top-notch strength, the Alliance had the advantage since they were scheming against each other. He was different from Lothar, who was in his 40s, burdened by military affairs, and whose strength had begun to decline. The title of the Alliance's god of war had fallen to Wother. The strongest holy knight, who was at the peak of his life, was showing Orgrim how he made his name on the Silverpine Forest's western front. It was a beautiful strike supported by the powerful holy light. The golden holy light was like a god descending from the heavens. The golden holy light gathered at one point and smashed towards Orgrim's face. In this era, in the world of Azeroth and the Church of Holy Light, there were no more than 30 people who could condense holy light into a tangible hammer. Each of them had their own experiences, and to the ordinary warriors present, they were no less than living legends. If any of them were to be placed in the army, they would be a terrifying figure that could rival 1,000 men. As for Wother, he was an existence that stood at the pinnacle of these peerless experts. When Wother smashed his hammer, Duque didn't dare to take it, even if he had the ice barrier, which was known to have absolute defense. In the end, the so-called absolute defense was only relative. The ice barrier used the extremely dense ice element to forcefully remove all power outside of the ice. But what about the higher-level, more focused power of holy light? Even Duque, who had the title of God of Magic, didn't have the confidence to do so. However, Orgrim countered the attack with his own attack and managed to nullify it. His muscles bulged, and his inhuman strength was completely revealed at this moment. Orgrim was actually using his hammer to fight against his hammer. When the countless golden lines of holy light that cut through the dark shadows in the hall collided with the terrifying rising lava fire, the collision of the elements produced a huge explosive effect that dazzled everyone's eyes. Everyone only saw the golden and reddish-black flames explode like fireworks. It was as if two huge Persian chrysanthemums were fiercely colliding and grinding against each other. Countless petals scattered and withered, and then there was a deafening collision sound. After a full 3 seconds, the flames that flowed out from the two people finally disappeared. No one would have thought that Wuther, who looked like a human, could actually fight like a wild beast. Orgrim frowned. The situation was not good for the tribe. Other than him, it seemed that only Rexer could faintly suppress that holy knight called Gavin Rad. The others were either in a stalemate or were directly at a disadvantage. Kargath Bladefist seemed incomparably powerful, trading injury for injury with Sidon Dathrahan, but the problem was that he was a holy knight who had the ability to recover. If the fight continued and he really didn't run, the one who would die would definitely be Kargath. The Blackscar chief, Ka Derek, was even worse off. He was directly suppressed by Tyrion Fordring, and could not even trade injuries for much. On the other hand, Kilrog Deadeye was evenly matched with the two female elven rangers. Kilrog was suppressing one of the rangers in close combat, but he was constantly annoyed by the ranger's shooting. If his blind eye couldn't provide him with a short period of foresight, then Kilrog might have already knelt down. Samuro wanted to chase after Duque, but he was held back by a female elven ranger. The problem was that the alliance still had many high-end forces. Bolvar was on a killing spree. The limits of the human body determined that it was impossible for them to surpass the beastmen in terms of pure strength. But the power of holy light made up for the lack of destructive power, and humans could be faster. No one would have thought that Bolvar's attack speed would be so fast. In reality, the leader of the Great Chief's guards could only see the golden light that suddenly appeared in his field of vision getting bigger and bigger. Then with a bang, his entire head turned into a cannonball and was sent flying by Bolvar from his tall and sturdy body. It pierced through one of the huge glass windows in the palace hall that was no less than 8 meters tall, and finally fell onto the lawn of the palace. When he saw the beastman's head fly out, a bloody eyeball popped out and hung on the top of King Eden's beloved glass window. Bolvar could not help but bare his teeth. The devout holy knight silently said in his heart, "Ugh, I can't see anything, and I don't know anything." Chapter 419. Bolvar, who was unable to retract his hammer in time, took advantage of the opportunity to launch a sneak attack on another of the chieftain's personal guards. A roundhouse elbow strike that most beastmen would not have expected caused the fellow to grimace. Just as the other party was in pain, Bolvar grabbed the beastman's well-braided braid and pulled it down, ruthlessly destroying its center of gravity. In the next moment, his metal boots stomped heavily on the back of the beastman's neck, causing the ugly green-skinned beast's face to intimately touch the floor. Finally, his foot smashed his face into the marble floor below. The holy knight's skill. Divine consecration. The powerful power of the holy light passed through the beastman's body and into the floor, creating a circular area with a diameter of 5 meters around it, dealing holy damage to all creatures that were not protected by the holy light. Yep, it also blinded the beastmen and their own people. The beastman beneath Bolvar's feet twitched a few times before unwillingly turning into a pile of charcoal. A few brave beastmen pounced at Bolvar, but they were all hammered away by the Storm Duke. All that was missing was a domineering, who else? Bolvar could change the name of the golden holy light on his body to the aura of a bastard. Oh, that's not right, it should be the aura of a tyrant. Of course, Bolvar was a humble holy knight. How could he do something as superficial as Duque? Servanas was also having a good time killing. Aurelia and Lillis against Kilrog, Sasha against Samuro, leaving Servanas free. Compared to Bolvar, Queen Sylvanas was the true god of slaughter. In a situation where there were no opponents of the same level to restrain them, an agile hero could kill faster. A giant hammer smashed down, and Queen Sylvanas took half a step back, allowing the hammer to slash across her chest by a hair's breadth. In the next moment, she suddenly pounced forward, the tip of her foot tapping on the hammer's head and leaping upwards. She was so fast that the beastman in front of her could only see a fleeting green shadow flash by. His throat and arteries had already been severed by the dagger. Standing lightly on the corpse that had yet to fall, Queen Sylvanas surveyed her surroundings. In front of her were 8 extremely strong beastmen pouncing at her. Outside, another 8 orc warriors were standing guard. The sound of the axe and sledgehammer crashing through the air was enough to make the scalps of the nearby Alterac royal family's guards go numb. Sylvanas chuckled softly. In the eyes of the orcs, he was like a dark queen standing on a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, laughing maniacally. In the next instant, they saw the lightning of thunder. Boom! With a cold face, Sylvanas reached her hands to the back of her waist, where 2 smaller quivers hung. Inside were arrows with metal arrowheads that did not conform to the Windrunner tradition, and the shafts were even shorter. When Queen Sylvie raised her hands again and flicked her fingers outwards, 4 short arrows shot out from the gaps between her slender fingers. With her unique technique, each arrow was wrapped in electricity, forming a spiral arrow that kept spinning clockwise, piercing through the throats of 8 orcs. In the next instant, something miraculous happened. Under the mysterious attraction of the lightning, all the short arrows flew to the bowstring that Queen Sylvanas had pulled back in midair. The short arrows shot out once again, following the trajectory of the electromagnetic trajectory in midair, hitting the orcs left front, right back, left back, a total of 8 unimaginable angles between the eyebrows of the orcs. A miraculous area of effect skill. Obviously, no one would teach Sylvanas how to use her new lightning ability. She had figured it out on her own. Orgrim's eyes darted around. Every battle situation was in his field of vision, and it was clear that the scales of victory were tipping in the Alliance's favor. After all, this was the capital of a human kingdom. Even if there were not many soldiers, the defense system was quite complete. There was no one to suppress the generals of Alterac. A few generals, including Haas, had freed up their hands to command the panicking troops and began to kill the orc soldiers more efficiently. Orgrim entered Alterac under the guise of an emissary. He could not bring too many people in anyway. 50 strong orcs was the bottom line that the Alterac people could accept. But now, these personal guard-level warriors were all killed by the Alliance's heroes in a few exchanges. Orgrim's heart was bleeding. The only one who had the upper hand was the Dragonmaw Dragon Knight. But he had a bad feeling because he suddenly realized that the most important person in the Alliance, and also the person he was most afraid of, was not here. The king of Alterac was important, but it was not enough for the vice-commander of the Alliance, Duque, to be King Eden's bodyguard. Duque's absence could only mean that Duque was looking for a bigger victory. Orgrim had fought with Duque for so long, he was very clear about Duque's way of doing things. In the world of Azeroth, most kings, commanders, and generals had a clear and distinct sense of home. They would subconsciously defend their important cities or resource points. Duque's way of fighting was completely different from these people. Duque did not care about the gains and losses of a city or land. He cared more about killing and injuring the Horde. His goal was to wipe out the Horde. At the start, even Orgrim himself did not realize it, much less the previous chief. But slowly, Orgrim realized that the Horde's wounded were much less than he had imagined. Of course, the orcs were brave and fierce. More importantly, the orcs had good physiques. As long as they were not crippled, the orcs could survive for a week or two, and with enough food, they would recover. But the number of wounded was too little. The young orcs would become veterans even if they were injured. After a few battles, the veterans would naturally become elites. Duque's tactic of killing one person rather than 10 caused a gap in the growth of the Horde's warriors. The Horde could not train their soldiers, and they died quickly. Naturally, the number of elites decreased. On the other hand, for some reason, large numbers of cowardly farmers, who used to be able to fight 100 horde warriors, became elite soldiers. Ever since the start of the war, the exchange rate between the orcs and the humans had been decreasing. Orgrim shuddered at the thought of this. "Duke Marcus, what are you eyeing on this horde?" Orgrim could not think of an answer, but he could see that the horde was no longer in a good position. "Retreat!" Orgrim roared. The heroes of the horde immediately thought of ways to escape from the battle. Orgrim's order to retreat was slightly late. After Duke had placed King Eden in the basement and was protected by a squadron of royal guards and 2 court mages, Duke arrived at the top of the castle. He saw an unexpected person. "Elucia, what are you doing here?" Duke was shocked. Chapter 420. In Duke's plan, Elucia was not supposed to appear here. Elucia's early return to her family to meet Duke Barov was actually to pave the way for Duke to meet with the Duke. Duke Barov was a family supremacist. If he was called over by King Eden and faced the situation directly, it was obvious that whether it was out of his friendship with Eden or consideration for his family's business, Duke estimated that there was a 90% chance that he would agree to join the alliance. In history, the Barov family had also boarded Eden's pirate ship and suffered terribly from Eden. When Alterac failed to suck up to the tribe's daddy, Eden fled to the Barov family's hometown, Caer Darrow, and was surrounded by the alliance's troops. Duke Barov finally chose to hand Eden over. But after the war, the Barov family's territory was still confiscated, which led to the Barov family offering the entire Caer Darrow to the cursing sect during the Third Battle of the Dark Portal, causing the family's territory to become a Scholomance where undead gathered. Since Duke knew about it, he would not let this tragedy happen. He easily convinced Duke Barov. It was simple. If even the Alliance's deputy commander, Duke, knew about the so-called betrayal of the Alliance, then the so-called rebellion was simply a joke. Since it was an anti-human plan that was destined to fail, even if it was the king he was loyal to, Duke Barov had no reason to board Eden's sinking ship. The reason for supporting the Alliance was also very simple. I am a human first, then a subject loyal to the king. Just like that, Duke obtained the full support of Duke Barov and his wife, and was able to use illusions to pretend to be Duke Barov and participate in Eden's betrayal. In Duke's plan, there was no need for Elucia to appear. But now, Elucia appeared on the rooftop under the protection of 4 strong private soldiers wearing the Barov family emblem. Not only Elucia, but there were also 2 Alterac court mages standing behind her. Duke glanced at the red dragon and griffins fighting in the sky and said nervously, "Elucia, it's dangerous here. I only told you to gather people to help set up the magic array. I didn't ask you to come. But I want to help you. Duke, you want to wipe out the Red Dragon army, don't you?" A strong gust of wind blew past, causing Elucia's beautiful black hair to flutter in the wind. Beneath her silver forehead ornament was a pair of beautiful, intelligent eyes. Being with Elucia had always made Duke feel comfortable. She was considerate and submissive, just like a little wife who would meekly endure whatever hardship she encountered. Not only that, but she had a good upbringing and excellent diplomatic skills, and she was also quite smart. However, Duke did not expect Elucia to be this smart. Duke smiled, "As I expected. I've seen through you." Elucia raised her chin a little proudly. "Of course, what you wanted me to do was to set up a magic circle to enhance the power of ice and snow, and I immediately thought of it. So I asked my father to use his connections to give you a little surprise." The daughter of the Barov family turned around and introduced them to Duke. These 2 are Alterac's court archmages Gasnard and Chailt. They can give you control of the Alterac Palace's magic array. At this point, Elucia blinked. One of the magic circles in the Alterac Palace is flight restriction. Duke was stunned. To be honest, Duke was not sure if Orgrim would come. He just instinctively felt that Orgrim would not let go of the chance to control a human kingdom. That was why he borrowed the power of Duke Barov, who was in power with Alterac, to bring in half of the Silverhand Knights and the Windrunner sisters. The Silverhand only had about 100 elite paladins. Half of the knights only had 70 people, which was not a problem for Duke Barov. If Orgrim did not come, these people would be more than enough to suppress King Eden. If Orgrim came, the Horde would be in trouble. Since Orgrim liked to use dragoons as cover, Duque hoped to change the ratio of air forces between the two sides. The Griffin Knights of the Wildhammer Dwarves were strong, but they should be used in better ways than to fight the Red Dragons. So, Duque secretly asked Lucia to arrange a magic array at the top of the palace. But Duque only wanted to deal a heavy blow to the Red Dragon army, not wipe them out. He knew his own strength. It was too difficult to wipe out hundreds of red dragons with the power of a Morning Star wizard. Lucia had just told him that even Eden's most trusted court wizard was from the Barra family, and that he could control the magic array in the palace to set up a no-fly zone. Then there was hope. A wave of ecstasy welled up in Duque's heart. Duque was so excited that he could not control himself. He subconsciously hugged Lucia and patted her on the back. "Ha! That's great! That's great! I'll kill you lizards this time. Lucia, you've done a great job." At first, Lucia was dumbfounded. She had never thought that Duque would be so happy that he hugged her. The next moment, a faint blush appeared on her elegant face. She said lightly, "Ugh, as long as you're happy, Duque." "Of course I'm happy. Alright, it's dangerous here. Go to a safe place quickly, I'm going to play big." With that, the simple-minded Duque threw her aside and went to discuss some matters with the two court wizards. Lucia pursed her lips, her small hands gripping the hem of her wizard robe tightly before letting go. Duque is a man who does big things. With that, she did not plan to pester Duque. After bidding farewell to Duque, she tactfully retreated. A few minutes after Duque sent a magical message, Kudrin, who was fighting in the sky, finally received Duque's message. "What? Are you kidding?" "Of course I'm not kidding. Please, you're playing with fire with the lives of all the Wildhammer Griffin Knights and Griffins in the Eagle Nest Mountain." Kudrin almost cursed out loud, losing speed and altitude in an aerial battle. "That's suicide. And falling from this height won't kill those lizards. Who told you that I want to fight a simple aerial battle? I don't agree. Unless you have a better reason to convince me." As he spoke, Kudrin controlled Scarlet to make a maneuver that was similar to Engerman's spin. While Scarlet was spinning, Kudrin used Stormhammer to send an orc flying into the air. "Alright, I've told you, my trump card is..." Upon hearing that name, Kudrin's body trembled. "Alright, you've convinced me." Chapter 421. Compared to the one-sided battle in the palace, the battle in the sky had reached its climax. Apart from Kudrin's initial ambush that successfully killed a group of red dragons, the rest were all bloody battles. The sky was filled with Wildhammer Dwarf Griffin Knights and Red Dragon Knights. A few human Griffin Knights were only joining in the fray, surrounding and attacking the injured red dragons. Overall, it was still disadvantageous for the alliance. It was mainly due to the individual differences. Griffins were strong, but that was only in the eyes of humans and beastmen. When facing the red dragons, the Griffins were suppressed in almost every aspect: speed, strength, defense, and vitality. Only in terms of agility were the Griffins slightly superior. Kudrin had been trying to make up for his lack of combat power with tactics, such as sending one Griffin to lure the red dragons while the other two Griffins attacked from the back, killing the Dragon Roar orcs first before dealing with the red dragons. Unfortunately, the overall situation was still precarious. However, with good coordination and cover, the injured Griffins quickly retreated and managed to maintain the situation. Kudrin did not know how to win, and most of the Wildhammer dwarves were only relying on their vitality to support themselves. Originally, Kudrin was not optimistic about Duque's plan, but since Duque had invited that person, he decided to trust him for the time being. "Duque, you bastard! If you join the Wildhammer Griffin Legion and perish here today, I will find you and beat you to death even if you hide in the depths of hell. Don't worry. Stay calm," Duque said in a magical message. "Damn it, I must be crazy." While muttering to himself, Kudrin kept his storm warhammer and held the reins with one hand while blowing the horn with the other. Asterisk woo, woo, woo. The distant and heroic sound of the horn attracted the attention of all the Wildhammer dwarves. At this moment, the sun suddenly broke through the thick layers of clouds. As if responding to the call of the Wildhammer King, the white wings of countless griffins shone with golden radiance under the sunlight. They quickly got rid of their opponents and began to gather at the center of the battlefield. But every Wildhammer dwarf was dumbfounded. The next sound of the horn was, "Landing?" A short inquiry was sent to Kudrin. The reply was still, "Land." The Wildhammer dwarves were dumbfounded. If they landed now, wouldn't their backs be exposed to the red dragon? And it was so dense. If the red dragon came over and used its dragon breath, that would really be... Oh, even if our king wants to roast our griffin friends, there's no need to do that, right? The Wildhammer dwarves almost burst into tears. However, there was no other way. Sensing the gathering of the griffins, the red dragons had automatically ascended to a higher altitude. Then, they all descended to a lower altitude and began diving down towards the griffins. "Descend. If you don't want to die, come down to the lawn of the palace." Kudrin ordered the herald beside him to repeatedly sound the horn, while he waved his arms fiercely, ordering his men to land. "Whatever. If I die, I die." The Wildhammer dwarves gnashed their teeth and cursed Kudrin. They cursed the ancestors of the bastard who came up with this idea and ordered the griffins to descend at high speed. Above their heads, the huge red dragon legion had also finished assembling. Nearly 300 dragons formed a terrifying dragon roar, forming a tsunami of sound that echoed in the clear sky. The dwarves turned their heads and saw the scene that covered the sky. As if they were under a spell, they were nailed to the backs of the griffins and could not move. Their eyes were filled with despair as they looked up at the sky. They were almost paralyzed. If it wasn't for the dwarves tying themselves to the back of the griffins to avoid being thrown down in the fierce aerial battle, perhaps the dwarves would have fallen like raindrops. A miracle happened. Almost at the moment when they descended to a height of 100 meters, every dwarf felt the change in the situation. They passed through a thin membrane that was almost invisible to the naked eye. It was freezing and cold. Almost every griffin and its knights shivered. This was Mage's ice barrier? They guessed right. Almost as soon as the last griffin passed through the shield, about 30 dragon breaths landed on the huge ice shield. When the blazing dragon's breath landed on the translucent ice barrier, a strange sizzling sound immediately rang out. It was a clash of heat and cold. The blazing flames evaporated the water on the barrier, and the cold counteracted the invasion of the heat. Amazing! Which Breaking Dawn great wizard had arrived? Or was this the magical defense system of the Alterac Palace? The dwarves who had already begun to descend handed the task to the griffins. They stared blankly at the hemispherical barrier that looked like a freshly peeled egg flickering under the bombardment of the dragon breaths, as if it would collapse at any moment, as if the flames of death would descend upon them at any moment. However, such a situation did not happen. It did not even deform. It only felt that the ice shards floating on the barrier were becoming denser. At this time, more than one Wildhammer dwarf saw Duque standing at the highest point of the castle where the palace was located. The deputy commander of the Alliance, the young man who had always been nicknamed the Miracle Man, was like a god descending to earth at this moment. Dozens of huge snowflakes were circling around him. Each hexagonal snowflake was as big as a basin, and they were circling around him in a specific trajectory. "Thank you for your support. Kudrin. Leave the rest to me, Duque." Duque shouted in an extremely pretentious manner. In the next second, Duque stretched out his 5 fingers with a cold expression. A bluish-white magic rose from the soles of his feet, illuminating Duque's face. From the perspective of the Red Dragon cavalry, Duque was surrounded by a huge magic formation that was at least 30 meters in diameter. Zuluhid, who was commanding in the air, had a drastic change in expression. He shouted, "Not good. Don't you think it's too late to escape now?" Duque sneered. A huge storm quickly formed at Duque's feet and spread rapidly. In the blink of an eye, the diameter of the storm was more than 300 meters. The griffins screamed in fear, trembling under the shocking power of this magic. But soon, they realized that they were already standing in the eye of the tornado, the safest place. There was nothing happening here. Instead, not far away, the icy wind that was as sharp as a knife was carrying pieces of ice crystals that were constantly spinning. With the swirling and the addition of a large amount of ice aura, these ice crystals quickly turned into huge round flakes, their sharp edges emitting a cold glint under the sun. Zulu hid, who was high up in the sky, ordered his subordinates to climb as fast as they could. But it was too late. A thick layer of frost had already formed on the surface of the dragon's wings. Although the dragons were not afraid of low temperatures, it was enough to reduce the frequency at which they flapped their wings, greatly reducing their climbing speed. In the next instant, the air seemed to have been sucked away. The giant dragon and its rider screamed in pain as they fell to the ground. What awaited them was a giant tornado of ice blades that kept spinning like a meat grinder. Chapter 422. Alterac Mountain was a very barren place. Apart from snow and rocks, there was almost nothing here. There were no specialties. Even if there were some mines, how could they dig in such terrible weather? Perhaps the snowmen here were the only specialties. Alterac didn't have griffins, but King Eden was afraid of griffins descending upon his castle. Thus, he set up a flight restriction magic circle on the castle. It wasn't entirely correct to say that it was a flight restriction. This magic circle mainly removed some of the wind element and increased gravity. Normally speaking, if Duke wanted to make a name for himself in a magic array like this, he would have to extract the wind elements and use them to form an ice storm to kill his enemies. This was a complete paradox. But Duke did it. Under the gazes of the hundreds of Wildhammer dwarves and the thousands of Alterac soldiers, everyone saw a huge ice tornado form under Duke's command. It was a huge tornado more than 20 meters above the ground. It was so big that one couldn't see its end. It wrapped around the towering mountains surrounding Alterac City in all four directions. The scenery in the distance was already blurry. All that could be seen were faint shadows rising and falling, as well as the faintly discernible mountain range. Apart from the contours of the world, all the landscape was destroyed by the huge spinning ice chunks. The giant dragon falling from the sky let out a powerful roar, but the roar that was full of vigor had long since been drowned out by the howling of the wind, turning into a muffled groan. The giant dragon was sucked into the tornado, its scarlet body quickly blurring and turning into a dark shadow. Just looking at the high-speed spinning made one dizzy, not to mention the terror of being caught in it. Bam! A huge bloody figure was embedded into the mountain to the north of Alterac City. Everyone focused and realized that it was the corpse of a young red dragon with almost all its scales peeled off. Its flesh was a bloody mess, and its body was covered in ice. Bam! There was another explosion, and a smaller red dragon fell to the ground a little outside the city wall. After falling to the ground, it also lost all sound and movement. Just like that, the red dragons that had landed with great momentum died tragically one after another in the outskirts of the city. No one dared to make a sound. They looked in awe at Duque, who was casting the spell at the top of King City. From time to time, he would look at the huge tornado with a diameter of several kilometers. It looked like the storm was boundless. It was like a black hole that swallowed everything, pulling in everything in the sky and stirring it up. Alterac City was like a garbage dump below, but it was also like an isolated island in the middle of a storm. It was so small, which was why the storm was so wide and so powerful. The ferocious griffin was like a docile kitten, crawling on the ground, shivering. The griffin knights who had been through hundreds of battles took off their helmets and paid their utmost respect to the powerful mage who stood at the top of the castle. Everyone seemed to be standing on this safe island, quietly watching the performance of the apocalypse storm. Everyone had lost the ability to speak, silently watching everything. Those who were not familiar with Duque had the deepest respect for Duque. Those who were familiar with Duque were puzzled. Wasn't Duque just a morning star wizard? Even if he had the support of a magic formation, could he do something so ridiculous? In fact, Elucia, who was one floor down from the top floor, smiled wryly at the pair of clowns in front of her. "Duque, you bastard, are you done yet? This old man can't hold on much longer." At the bottom of the staircase beside Duque's feet, an old man with a white beard, dressed in magnificent epic equipment that blinded all wizards, was cursing loudly. "Just a little bit more. I'll be done after dealing with these 5. Duque seemed to be chanting, but he was actually replying. "Bah. Just materials for 5 red dragons? This old man looks down on you." The white-bearded old wizard continued to curse, but at least he had some humanity and did not stop immediately. However, the light of the magic circuits that appeared on his body was gradually dimming. "Tisk, it's not that I'm the scapegoat, but when you see the materials for a red dragon, a dog, pouncing on it like it's biting a bone." Duque had wanted to say that the dog ate sh*t, but he changed his words. "Bastard, you still dare to anger me? Do you believe that I won't take a few more and leave?" The white-haired old man continued to curse. "Do you believe that when Alexstrasza comes after me in the future, I'll give you up first? I'll kill you first. All right, come." Duque smiled evilly, looking like a dead pig that was not afraid of boiling water. The old man did not utter a word. Ilucia could not help but let out its oof. Oomph. The two of them ignored each other. Who was this old man? Naturally, he was the Dalajan's greatest, most powerful, and most magnificent chairman, Antonidas. After gaining control of the magic formation, the first thing that Duque thought about was how to maximize the results of the battle. Since he wanted to keep the entire Red Dragon Legion here, he alone could not do it. So he used a magic message and dragged Antonidas into the water. Dragons were fierce, but every part of a dragon's body was a treasure. Dragon scales could be made into armor, dragon tendons could be made into powerful siege weapons, dragon skin could be made into magic materials, dragon blood could be made into magic potions. The problem was that not many people in this world dared to slay dragons. That was because the dragon race was a clan, a nest. When the young were killed, the big ones came, and when the big ones were killed, the old ones came. The older they were, the more powerful they were. This was especially true for a large family like the Red Dragons, which had thousands of members. If the Red Dragons went all out, they had the power to flatten a country. So most adventurers and mages could only stare at the treasures the dragons had on them. For thousands of years, they had been waiting for a traitor to appear in the Dragon Clan. Well, actually, there were a few traitors, such as the Black Dragon Clan. However, the Black Dragon Clan was extremely arrogant, and they appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Who could catch them? This time, Duque directly proposed to Antonidas that he would slay a large number of dragons in his own name and split the profits with Antonidas. Antonidas could not refuse this temptation at all. Rumor had it that the Red Dragon Queen was being controlled, causing the Red Dragons to join the horde against the alliance. Who knew if Alexstrasza would come after him after she got out of trouble? Now that Duque had sworn that he would take care of the Red Dragon Queen, Antonidas's thoughts became active. In the end, he could not resist the temptation and was dragged down by Duque. The world only saw Duque's arrogance and dominance. Who would know that Antonidas, one of the only 2 Breaking Dawn mages in the world, was at Duque's feet helping him? Moreover, even their magic circuits were the same version. Chapter 423. The advantage of being a transmigrator was on full display at this moment. Knowing that Eden wasn't kind, Duque was able to stop the situation from worsening and turn defeat into victory. Knowing Alexstrasza's true situation, Duque wasn't afraid of the Red Dragon Queen's revenge. Having so many of the dragon race's descendants killed was a very sad thing. But being controlled by Demon's soul for a lifetime, being tortured by the crippled beastman Necros every day without being able to resist, and having to send the Red Dragons to their deaths, this was the true tragedy. As long as Duque broke Demon Soul's control over Alexstrasza, the Red Dragon Queen wouldn't be able to thank him enough. Why would she vent her anger on him for slaughtering her descendants? Thus, Antonidas's fear was completely unfounded. Because of an unlikely event, he felt that he owed Duque a huge favor. Antonidas was also a model of taking advantage of others. Oh, that wasn't entirely true. At the very least, the red dragon's scales and skin had earned him quite a bit. Of course, this didn't stop Duque from showing off. At the edge of Alterac City, Horde Chief Orgrim and his old comrades watched this scene in shock. Duke, who was standing on top of the city, was like a god, waving his arms, summoning gales and blades of ice, wantonly splitting the sky, causing the giant dragons in the sky to scream and fall to the mortal world. Not a single dragon could escape the terrifying storm. Not a single dragon had the ability to pass through the storm and give Duque the slightest blow. These overlords of the sky that usually soared in the sky were now no better than pigs in a slaughterhouse, being slaughtered one-sidedly. Orgrim guessed that this was the work of the humans' magic arrays. As a warrior, his knowledge of mysticism was still lacking. However, that sense of crisis and that sense of urgency made Orgrim's mind frantically ring the alarm bells. Seeing the battered and exhausted Zulucid flying over on his last dragon, Orgrim couldn't help but roar, "Is there any news of Ghoul, Dan? The tribe needs his evil power right now." Zulud gritted his teeth and lowered his head. "I've already sent a messenger, but there's no reply." "Then send more messengers. 2 riders to a group, 3 riders to a group. If that doesn't work, then you can go yourself." Orgrim was fuming. He was a little confused. Could it be that every capital city in this world had such a powerful magic defense system? Stormwind City burned down 100,000 orcs. As soon as Kuel Salis entered the country, he had to rely on Ghoul, Dan to break through the magic defense system. Even Alterac, the weakest of the 7 human kingdoms, had a magic formation that could annihilate hundreds of dragons. Wouldn't the magic defense of Lordaeron, the strongest human kingdom, be? Orgrim didn't dare to imagine it. Even after sending Zulu Hid away, Orgrim was still in a bad mood. He could not help but mutter, "Does every kingdom have this many defensive magic circles?" "That doesn't seem to be the case, Great Chief." A voice that Orgrim didn't recognize sounded. The Great Chief turned around and saw an unfamiliar face. It was a sword saint of the Fireblade clan. This young sword saint seemed to be here to report on a mission. The only thing that Orgrim was curious about was that the sword saint was carrying a human in each hand. Sensing the Great Chief's suspicious gaze, the sword saint immediately explained in the orc language, "Just now, I used Blade Storm to kill a lot of human nobles, but these 2 young humans with the Duke's insignia have magical defensive devices on their bodies and escaped death. I think they are very important human nobles." Able to block a sword saint's Blade Storm? There weren't many of such devices, and even if there were, they were very expensive. Orgrim remembered that Samuro had said that he almost killed the King of Stormwind, and that the king did not have such anti-weapon devices. Most beastmen were uncouth, and only a few Great Chief were willing to learn the common language and human knowledge. However, the Fireblade Sword Saint, who was the strongest assassin and scout of the beastmen, was definitely an exception. Mastering the enemy's language and knowing who was the most valuable target was definitely a necessary lesson for an assassin. Orgrim didn't care about the others, but before he used the spell, he had carefully told the Sword Saints about Alterac's noble insignia. Just like the Sword Saint, Orgrim could tell just by looking at the badges of these 2 young humans. Bear of family? 2 dukes? Brand new duke insignia? Let's get back to what you were talking about, Sword Saint. As Orgrim spoke in orc language, he flashed a sinister smile at the 2 young humans who were panicking. The 2 of them were so scared that they peed their pants. There were obvious water stains on their crotches. The Sword Saint didn't care at all and replied in orc language, "I just casually asked them, and they swore that Alterac definitely doesn't have such a terrifying magic defense." Orgrim was overjoyed. He turned to the 2 of them and spoke in human language, "I am the Great Chief of the Horde, Orgrim Doomhammer. The Horde's plan failed tonight, and I am very unhappy. Between the 2 of you, I'm only going to keep the most valuable one. The useless one will be the ogre's dinner." He purposely grinned, letting his sharp, crisscrossed fangs dangle in front of the 2 similar-looking fellows. In fact, to the two of them, he looked more like an ogre. I'll talk. I'll tell you everything I know. Don't eat me. The older one looked like he was about to cry. Listen to me, that useless Wilden doesn't know anything. Don't listen to Alex. Orgrim was annoyed. He roared and pointed at one of them. Shut up. I'll ask you answer. Orgrim asked as he led the dispirited chieftains. But as he asked, Orgrim's eyes lit up. Ha. The entire mountain path echoed with Orgrim's wild laughter. He patted Kilrog Deadeye's shoulder. We've found a treasure. Today is actually the Horde's lucky day. Orgrim didn't expect that what he couldn't accomplish with so many powerful chiefs would be accomplished by the two kids that were captured by the Sword Saint. These two young men weren't just any Tom, Dick, or Harry. They were the two precious sons of Duke Barov, Wilden Barov and Alex Barov. Chapter 424. As representatives of useless nobles with bloodline but no abilities, these two brothers could be said to have displayed their cowardice to the extreme. Historically, these two had always been at odds with each other. Even after their families were destroyed, they still wanted to kill each other. Even after they went to Draenor to open a lumber company, these two hated each other so much that they could not wait for each other to be destroyed so that they could take everything. History took a beautiful turn because of Duque. Duque never thought that these two brothers, who he thought were not worth his attention, would become the deciding factor in the war between the Alliance and the Horde. It was fine if these two brothers had no morals, but the key thing was that they knew a lot. From the geography of each country to their strength and military supplies, they actually knew everything. As the next generation of the Barov family, they were not young anymore. Duke Barov even trained them early and let them deal with family affairs. Alterac was the weakest country. Since they could not send too many soldiers, the Barov family mostly provided food and logistics to the countries of the Alliance to fulfill their obligations as members of the Alliance. Therefore, these two brothers actually knew most of the Alliance's military deployment and the situation around Lordaeron Mill Lake. After all, the three countries around Lordaeron Mill Lake were Lordaeron on the north coast, Dalagen on the south coast, and Alterac in the southeast. My information is absolutely accurate. I go to Lordaeron every year. Wilden shouted, trying to take credit. No. My internal information is correct. Alterac does not have such a strong magic defense system. Alex argued. There is nothing to argue about. Orgrim laughed and hugged the two brothers affectionately. He made a grand promise. As long as your information helps the Horde take down Alterac and Lordaeron, you will be the heroes of the Horde. Then you will be the heroes of the tribe, and you will receive the treatment of a tribal chief. I will also make one of you the king of the humans in the south and the other the king of the humans in the north. Really? Thank you, Chief. I will do my best. The two were so touched that they were about to cry. They did not even notice the strong smell of urine in their pants. The two were ambitious but brainless. They did not know that Orgrim's promise was a trap. He had to take it down first. Secondly, if all the humans on the continent were killed by the tribe, then what was the use of being the so-called king? Kilrog glanced at the two traitors and asked in the Beastman language, "Are you really going to let them be kings?" Orgrim smiled. Why not? They had lost too many orc laborers. Someone has to make up for it. After the situation in Alterac calmed down, King Eden walked out of the basement under the protection of his guards. The tragic scene in front of him made him want to cry, but no tears came out. All dead. The hardcore nobles who supported him had all been turned into minced meat. Eden vomited at a glance. In his eyes, the incomparably beautiful and holy royal city was now in a state of devastation. There were destroyed houses everywhere, and the corpses of dragons and griffins that had fallen to the ground. When the orc chieftain broke out of the encirclement, there were only less than 10 of them, but they were chased and intercepted by half of the Silver Hand Knights, 4 Elven Rangers, and over 1,000 soldiers. Eden could not imagine how Orgrim would deal with him and his kingdom. Just the thought of Orgrim's ferocious fangs made Eden's legs tremble. Unfortunately, he could not turn back. Duke's appearance had blocked his last hope of turning to the tribe. Your Majesty, please restrain your grief. But the most important thing now is to evacuate the people. Since the main force of the tribe is not far from here, King Alterac will not be able to defend. Duke spoke as if it was a trivial matter. Wuther and the others beside Duke also looked at Eden and his guards with disgust. Duke did not bother with Aiden. Although he was the Alliance's vice commander, he was still not qualified to judge a king. That was something that could only be done after the other kings voted. Huss, please come here. We need to discuss how to fight this battle. General Huss's expression was complicated. The king he served was finished. As a human general, he had to carry out his duty for the survival of the human race. He knew that from this moment on, he and his soldiers would have to listen to this ridiculously young commander. Duke did not avoid this and brought Huss and Wuther to Alterac's command center. Duke pointed at the shattered ridge where Alterac City was located. Traps are useless. Orgrim is not an idiot. I've already tricked him with magic traps twice, but I won't do it a third time. Moreover, the broken ridge is too small to defend against too many elites of the Horde. Orgrim won't send too many troops either, so what we need to do is to kill enough of the Horde and then retreat. On the other side, Duke Barev stood at the top of the castle, staring blankly at the mountains in the distance. Today was destined to be Alterac's day of suffering. Alterac did not turn to the tribe, but it was destined to suffer the flames of war. No matter what, King Eden would be nailed to the pillar of shame. Perhaps he would not be able to make a comeback for the next few centuries. The Barev family would not have it easy either. He had thought that with Duke's reminder, the Barev family would be able to jump out of the sinking ship that was Alterac. Duke Barev had thought of many possibilities, such as the Barev family completely breaking away from Alterac and turning to Stormwind, who actually controlled the Hillsbrad Hills. In any case, Hillsbrad was the Barev family's fief. It was just that the ruler had changed in name. Even if King Lang had to bear the shame of losing his capital, it would still be 1,000,000 times better than Eden, who had become a traitor. But now, everything was over. Because of the betrayal of the two unfilial sons, the only two successors of the Barev family were on the wrong boat. The Barev family could not avoid being nailed to the pillar of shame. Worst of all, an eyewitness told Duke Barev that his two sons had been kidnapped by the tribe's sword saint. Alex Barev trembled all over. He knew his son's character too well. What if, just as he was about to collapse, King Eden walked over? Alex, is this the ending you wanted? You and I are finished. Our family is finished. Not only did we not get anything, we have to give up everything. Eden waved his arms in agitation. Duke Barev was speechless. He looked at his childhood friend in a daze, his gaze unfocused. Just as the Duke was about to say something, the two guards beside Eden suddenly flew out. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.